Lindley didn't believe in UFOs
What is that
until
thing?
that night.
I don't know.
A Coast Guard officer, 32 years old, father of two, a man whose job it was to distinguish fishing boats from smugglers in the dark. That night began like a routine watch. The Atlantic Ocean.
Look, it's right there. Do you see it?
A
It's
light
moving
breeze.
really fast.
The sound of waves.
What is that thing? Stay close to me.
And then, a light. Not a lighthouse, not an airplane. A silvery mass, motionless, as if suspended by invisible cables 100 meters above the water. Lindley raised his binoculars. Its shape, cigar-shaped.
What is that thing? I have no idea. Keep the camera
metallic,
steady.
It's coming
reflecting the
closer.
moonlight. No identifying marks, no sound. He called his partner, then two more. All four watched as the object began its vertical rise, slowly, steadily, like an elevator ascending into the sky. A minute later, it was gone. Lindley wrote his report that night, every word meticulously verified, not a single correction in 56 years, his testimony in this investigation. Along with 22 others that will change the way you look at the sky, all information shared here derives from publicly available FAA data and the testimonies of the crews and controllers who observed these perplexing events. Welcome to the FAA case files. Our investigation leads us to a radar incident near Los Angeles, California in the year 2020. The airspace located west of Los Angeles represents one of the most meticulously regulated and closely monitored areas in the United States. Every hour, myriad high-altitude jet routes trace their paths over the Pacific, facilitating international departures from Los Angeles International Airport and guiding incoming flights from Asia and various northern states. The Los Angeles Air Route Traffic Control Center, commonly referred to as Los Angeles Center, oversees this aerial ballet, executing its role with the seamless efficiency expected from a system designed to function without incident. Pilots expect nothing less than a steady rhythm, consistent radio frequencies, predictable air traffic patterns, and radar systems that accurately portray every aircraft legally occupying the sky. However, on a seemingly ordinary afternoon in early 2020, that reliable system recorded an unexpected anomaly that would linger in memory. The airliner in question was cruising at cruising altitude, following a westward trajectory toward the Pacific Ocean, all beneath a sunlit sky with gentle breezes aloft. As the crew settled into the tranquil phases of their flight, allowing the autopilot to embrace the routine demands and shift their focus to monitoring instruments, communicating with air traffic control, and strategizing for their next waypoint, the activity of Los Angeles Center Sector 16 enveloped them, a high-altitude block extending across California's coastline. No signals suggested that their flight was about to weave itself into the tapestry of unidentified aerial phenomena until the captain contacted the controller, his voice calm, precise, yet tinged with a hint of tension, a tone that pilots typically adopt when grappling with something they are not entirely confident they observed. The captain reported that something had zoomed directly overhead. The controller's immediate response was to ask for further clarity, standard protocol whenever an unexpected traffic advisory is relayed by a flight crew. Given that the system is engineered to capture every element within its purview, the report of an unidentified object instigated urgent concerns for airspace safety. The controller inquired as to the nature of the traffic. The captain relayed his observations with a straightforward, no-nonsense clarity that often graces official reports. The object he described was small, bright white, and moving at a velocity surpassing any aircraft they had previously identified at that altitude. There were no strobe lights, no navigation signals, no contrail marking its path, just a swift, clean passage above their flight line, resembling a white streak blurring through their vision. The controller's first reaction involved scanning the radar display for any hint of an untagged or uncorrelated target. Every aircraft equipped with a transponder should exhibit altitude, call sign, and route data. Even military flights on specialized assignments customarily utilize a transponder code visible to civilian controllers. However, the radar sweep revealed what later came to be known as a single primary flash, an ephemeral contact that materialized in one sweep of the radar, only to disappear before the subsequent one. Primary radar returns are raw reflections lacking identification. Utilized when no transponder signals are detected, they indicate either an aircraft without such equipment, a malfunctioning unit, or something that does not conform to conventional. Aviation. The singular appearance of the target intensified the peculiarity of the situation. Had the object been a small airplane, a helicopter, or even a drone, it would have generated repeated primary signals even at considerable speeds. The fleeting return implied either extraordinary velocity, a minuscule radar cross-section, a drastic altitude change, or perhaps an atmospheric reflection, though the latter was improbable given the stable weather conditions. Thus, the controller requested the pilots to reconfirm their altitude. This standard cross-check ensured that the autopilot had not deviated and that the crew's report aligned with the data present on the board. Everything corresponded precisely. The airliner occupied the designated airspace as planned. The object had soared just above, visible for a fleeting instant, then vanished from their line of sight. Other aircraft operating within surrounding sectors were casually queried, yet none reported any anomalies, neither traffic nor visual irregularities. No transponder codes were noted as absent within the system. No active handoffs from Oakland Center or San Diego Center matched the unidentified target. Controllers proceeded to review notices to airmen, which incorporate entries for military drills, missile tests, balloon launches, and the routes designated for experimental aircraft. There was nothing of relevance recorded. No Navy training exercises were scheduled off the coast, nor were there planned high-altitude military corridors or any classified or restricted activities situated in that area during that time. The event was subsequently flagged for thorough radar playback review, a standard procedure initiated any time a pilot reports unexpected traffic. This radar playback enables technicians to scrutinize raw data in isolation, examining it frame by frame, free of the filtering and smoothing algorithms typically employed during live operations. Its primary purpose is to unveil subtle targets or objects that might sporadically breach detection thresholds. During the review, the same single primary return resurfaced. One solitary flash of data, devoid of a track line, speed vector, and altitude readout emerged for a fleeting instant, aligning closely with the timing of the pilot's observation. However, afterward, there was nothing. The system displayed a pristine slate across the surrounding airspace. One notable difficulty in circumstances such as this, a challenge that the Federal Aviation Administration grapples with across numerous unidentified aerial phenomena reports, lies in the fact that commercial aircraft predominantly depend on the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System for collision prevention. The Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, known as TCS, supervises transponder signals emitted by other aircraft in order to forecast potential threats and separation concerns. Nevertheless, in instances where an object lacks a transponder, TCS remains silent. The sole alert stems from a pilot's observation or a primary radar flash. In this particular incident, the TCS system emitted no warning, as there was no signal available for detection. This effectively indicated that the airliner had encountered something that transcended the conventional structure of the national airspace system. Pilots undergo training to minimize ambiguity in safety-related reports. Consequently, upon landing, the crew meticulously documented the occurrence according to standard Federal Aviation Administration protocols, characterizing the object as white, fast-moving, and traversing overhead in close proximity. They refrained from utilizing speculative language, abstained from shape descriptions beyond identifying it as a white object, and avoided conjecture regarding altitude or intent. Their report closely mirrored the subsequent summary produced internally by the Federal Aviation Administration, which detailed a visual sighting of an unidentified object that exhibited a brief primary radar signature without any corresponding data. The case was routed to the Federal Aviation Administration's Safety Analysis Department, as any unidentified aircraft within controlled airspace automatically falls under risk assessment procedures. The analysis probed for possible drone activity, but none was logged in the vicinity. They also investigated military flight exercises, but found no coordinated notifications. Checks extended to weather anomalies, optical illusions, reflections from distant objects, and high-altitude balloons, yet none aligned with the reported speed or trajectory. The Federal Aviation Administration reached out to the North American Aerospace Defense Command as part of routine interagency collaboration. The North American Aerospace Defense Command confirmed the absence of active air defense tracks, no missile tests, and no unidentified radar returns that aligned with the incident's timeline. Their analysis concluded similarly to that of the Federal Aviation Administration: unexplained, uncorrelated, and lacking any available data for categorization. What distinguishes this specific encounter at the Los Angeles Center is not the brief duration, as the entire event spanned mere seconds, but rather the clarity surrounding the incident. A definitive visual sighting, a sharp momentary radar return, a serene sky devoid of traffic complexities, alongside a prominent control center incapable of associating the intrusion with any recognized aircraft, military flight plan, or sanctioned aerial activity. In the lexicon of Federal Aviation Administration reporting, the incident remained classified as an unidentified airborne object, a label employed not to insinuate an exotic origin, but rather to signify that the object could not be identified within the parameters of the National Airspace System. It was neither a balloon nor an aircraft nor a drone. It denoted an object that penetrated a high-altitude airway, intersecting the trajectory of a commercial airliner and evaded detection on the radar without leaving behind a trace. And this is precisely why it continues to be a case that Federal Aviation Administration radar technicians and controllers sporadically reference. Not due to any theatrical quality, but because it presented a fundamental challenge to the foundational principle upon which the airspace system is built, that every object at altitude should manifest somewhere on radar, find a place in the logs, and within the framework designed to ensure aircraft separation and accountability. On that particular afternoon, something did not. For a brief span over California, one flight crew and one controller observed the system falling silent around a singular object that should not have been able to vanish so completely. The Phoenix airliner encounter in Arizona during 2018 unfolds against the backdrop of airspace renowned for its clarity among airline crews. Outside the summer monsoon season, visibility frequently surpasses 100 miles, and the altitude exceeding 30,000 feet typically offers smooth and predictable conditions. Aircraft navigating this segment of Arizona adhere to well-established high-altitude jet routes such as J-11, J-65, and J-74, all under the supervision of Phoenix Center, one of the 22 air route traffic control centers. Overseen by the Federal Aviation Administration in relation to the National Airspace System. Controllers tasked with handling these high-altitude sectors grow accustomed to a steady flow of radio communications, pristine radar returns, and the tranquil confidence that arises from managing an orderly workload. However, in early 2018, that sense of certainty faced an interruption. The initial aircraft involved was a commercial airliner cruising westward above flight level 300. The flight had surpassed the final handoff point and settled into a routine operational rhythm. With the autopilot engaged, the crew diligently monitored fuel levels, waypoint sequences, engine indicators, and the TCAS display, which revealed no nearby traffic. Weather updates along their trajectory indicated clear conditions. The closest convective activity was situated far to the south. Everything suggested that the flight would proceed without encountering any anomalies. While scanning the horizon, the first officer noted the captain leaning forward slightly to engage the microphone. "Phoenix Center, we just had something pass over us," the captain transmitted, the steadiness of his voice reflecting the careful tone employed by pilots when conveying information outside the ordinary. The controller responded without delay, requesting further clarification. The pilot elaborated that they had witnessed a reflective object swiftly move above their aircraft. The object seemed to be traveling perpendicular to their flight path, crossing from left to right. The captain added that it displayed no lights and presented no discernible structure before vanishing from their line of sight. The controller scrutinized the radar screen. The radar image at Phoenix Center is derived from long-range air route surveillance radar sites situated in Prescott, Winslow, and Kingman, complemented by additional feeds from both the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Defense. At this altitude, virtually any object with mass should generate at least an occasional primary return. Yet, the sweep displayed nothing. No untagged returns, no faded track histories, no ADS-B identifiers. The sector remained clear. Negative contact, the controller conveyed. The pilots exchanged a brief glance, a shared understanding between colleagues who had witnessed the same elusive object but found no means to rationalize it. Continuing their journey, they documented the time to prepare for a potentially necessary safety report later. The radio fell silent for several moments, with standard instructions and altitude assignments intermittently circulating over other frequencies. Suddenly, another voice emerged, this time from an eastbound airliner traveling at a similar altitude and along a parallel airway. "Center, this is flight." While the identifier was clipped on the frequency, it was still recognizable to the controller. "We also just had something pass above us, fast-moving and metallic." The controller leaned back slightly, now faced with two separate airliners heading in different directions, both reporting sightings of objects above them within mere minutes of each other. Neither aircraft had a way to hear one another's initial report, producing independent descriptions, yet the terminology aligned almost perfectly. Fast, reflective, above their altitude and devoid of lights. Inquiring about the estimated altitude, the captain of the second aircraft indicated that the object was either at their altitude or slightly higher. The TCAS failed to register anything. With minimal cockpit lighting, the crew found it easier to see any reflective surfaces, and they unanimously agreed that the object emitted a bright glint, far sharper than what a balloon or drone could provide. Once again, the controller swept the radar, yet still found nothing. At high altitude, the likelihood of a drone was nearly zero. Drones are limited in range, battery life, and propulsion, rendering them incapable of reaching 30 to 35,000 feet. Military aircraft are mandated to coordinate with FAA centers, particularly near Phoenix, where multiple training corridors exist, yet those corridors were not activated without notification. Weather balloons ascend vertically rather than traverse horizontally at high speeds. Additionally, satellite glints do not manifest directly overhead at such close distances. They are typically observed from afar, not crossing from one side of the cockpit window to the other. Coming to terms with having two separate pilot reports absent of radar correlation, the controller expanded the range on his display and searched for high-speed targets that might have crossed into another sector. Nothing appeared to be moving at extreme velocities or bouncing in and out of coverage. He reached out to Albuquerque Center to verify the adjacent sector's status. They reported no uncorrelated primary returns. Repeating the request to Los Angeles Center yielded the same response: no anomalies, no untagged tracks. The controller proceeded to check for any nearby military operations. Luke Air Force Base lies west of Phoenix and frequently hosts F-35 training missions, but such operations are generally carried out at lower altitudes or within designated military operation areas, MOASE. At the time, none of those airspaces were active. No military flight plans aligned with the location or altitude mentioned in the pilot reports. Furthermore, the FAA's internal log indicated no high-altitude special use airspace in operation that day. Moments later, the second crew relayed that the object seemed to be traveling significantly faster than the ground speed of their own aircraft. Airliner jets typically cruise between Mach 0.75 and Mach 0.82 in this airspace, equating to approximately 480 to 540 knots. The object's apparent lateral speed surpassed these figures, coursing across their visual field in mere seconds. They also emphasized its absence of strobe or navigation lights, a critical detail separating unidentified objects from known aircraft. The controller meticulously noted this occurrence for mandatory reporting. An unidentified airborne object devoid of lights at high altitude clearly presents a separation risk. Even without radar verification, the FAA must address the potential for an unsafe encounter. Once both aircraft arrived at their respective destinations, the flight crews submitted independent pilot reports. Each account described the object as reflective, rapid, and above their altitude. Neither report indulged in speculative language. Airline crews consciously avoid such conjecture. They document solely what they observe. Both noted the absence of lights. Both acknowledged the lack of a radar or TCAS alert. Both depicted the object as crossing their path too swiftly to categorize by shape. The FAA's safety management system launched a standard review. The radar playback team accessed raw data, eliminating filtering algorithms and atmospheric suppression to capture any faint primary returns. They uncovered no corresponding blips, no traces of untracked movement, no signal degradation, or signs of a transponder failure that might have caused an aircraft to drop off the radar. DSB logs for the entire region underwent thorough examination. No unknown aircraft surfaced. Every transponder in the vicinity aligned with a recognized flight plan. No altitude deviations evidenced. No nearby aircraft lost their GPS signals. Everything within the system functioned as expected, except for the unidentified object reported by 2 independent flight crews. The review broadened to include military coordination channels. The Air Force reported no supersonic flight corridors, no test vehicles, and no off-schedule classified aircraft in that sector. Airspace remained undisturbed that day. Given that 2 separate crews witnessed the same type of object within minutes, the FAA escalated the case to the Department of Defense's UAP Task Force, which had been assessing military and civilian UAP events since 2017. While the task force acknowledged the incident, no public findings were returned. In the absence of radar, infrared, or tracking data, they possessed no material for analysis beyond the pilot reports. From a safety angle, the FAA classifies such events using a straightforward standard: unidentified airborne object, no radar correlation, no hazards observed, yet a potential safety risk given its unknown nature and altitude. For the controllers at Phoenix Center, this incident emerged as one of those rare anomalies that stands out not due to its theatricality, but because of its consistency. 2 separate crews, completely unaware of each other's presence, reported nearly identical sightings of a swift, reflective object flying at approximately the same altitude. With no radar hits, no ADSB signals, no military affiliations, and no explanations involving balloons or drones, as well as an absence of atmospheric or optical causes, the object did not reappear in any further sightings. It was one of those fleeting moments in controlled airspace when the system lost its usual predictability, exposing something that traversed the sky faster and quieter than anticipated, leaving behind merely 2 brief transmissions that mirrored one another. We just had something pass directly over us. Within the FAA's realm of aviation, incidents like this remain unresolved, not because they evoke sensationalism, but rather due to a lack of substantial data to reach a definitive conclusion. With airspace meticulously mapped, structured, and monitored, it remains intriguing that on that day in 2018, something traversed above 2 commercial airliners without leaving any evidence aside from the pilot sightings. This prompted a later acknowledgement from the FAA that when an object manifests at high altitudes without lights, identification, or transponder signals, even if only for a moment, it constitutes a legitimate anomaly. This serves to underscore the reality that not every airborne encounter fits seamlessly into the frameworks designed to monitor them. The American Airlines Flight 2292 incident in New Mexico during 2021 stands as one of the most widely debated FAA aviation anomalies in recent memory, not for any sensationalist framing or conjecture, but due to the overwhelmingly routine circumstances that surrounded it. The event unfolded in clear air along a standard route at an ordinary cruising altitude, with an experienced flight crew well versed in the necessity of precise communication. Nothing remarkable occurred on the frequency, nor was anything abnormal detected on radar. Although brief, the event was sharp enough to incite immediate reporting to Albuquerque Center. The aircraft involved was an Airbus A320 navigating from Cincinnati to Phoenix, a path that is straightforward, proceeding westward and climbing through Midwestern airspace before entering the Southwest with altitude adjustments between Kansas City Center, Denver Center, and ultimately Albuquerque Center. Having settled into the cruise phase over northeastern New Mexico, everything seemed routine. The autopilot managed altitude effortlessly, the weather across the route remained stable, and jet stream conditions stayed mild. The flight's TCS display indicated no nearby aircraft. All around them, the sky exuded the typical symphony of high-altitude operations. Soon after midday, the captain initiated communication with an urgency that sharply contrasted the calmness of the radio traffic. Albuquerque Center, American 229-2. Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go directly over us. Controllers are trained to detect nuances in pilot communications, paying attention to alterations in pace, tone, and wording, since pilots seldom report traffic without a solid foundation of certainty. The controller requested the captain to clarify the report, trying to ascertain what exactly had just passed overhead and at what altitude. The pilot expanded on the observation, stating that he regretted to mention it, but it appeared to resemble a long cylindrical object, akin to a cruise missile and moving at considerable speed. Such phrasing caught attention. Airline captains do not draw comparisons between unidentified aerial phenomena and military munitions unless the shape and velocity compel such an assertion. Promptly, the controller scanned the radar display. The Albuquerque Center's radar picture consolidates inputs from multiple long-range radars throughout the region, including Cannon Air Force Base. Had anything with a radar profile similar to an aircraft or missile traversed the area, it should have registered at least as a fleeting primary return. The screen displayed nothing. No untethered primary hits, no erratic tracks, no bursts of movement. Absolutely no objects were detected nearing the A320's altitude. American 229-2, negative contact, the controller conveyed. In the cockpit, the two pilots exchanged glances that conveyed professionalism rather than emotion. Seasoned airline crews have encountered glints, balloons, reflections, and drones, but never at such altitude, and certainly not at that velocity. They logged the encounter time, with the captain also noting the compass heading from where the object had emerged and vanished. The first officer checked the TCAS a second time. Still, nothing. The controller then reached out to adjacent sectors to verify whether anyone else had observed or tracked anything extraordinary. There was no response indicating sightings. No unaccounted transponders, no unidentified VFR targets, and no recorded high-speed military operations were noted at the center. The radar display was as pristine as one could expect during a calm midday period. The Albuquerque Center also inquired about military coordination, a routine procedure when pilots mention objects resembling military ordnance. Cannon Air Force Base and Holloman Air Force Base, both located in New Mexico, occasionally undertake training exercises. The FAA maintains direct communication lines for real-time activity monitoring. However, both bases confirmed there were no missile tests, no drone operations, and no high-altitude activities corresponding to the time and location. No supersonic corridors were active, nor was any special-use airspace opened. Importantly, nothing was anticipated in proximity to commercial air traffic. The controller returned to the frequency, relaying to American 229-2 that no military activity had been reported. No known traffic was detected at their altitude. The captain acknowledged this communication, and the flight continued its journey toward Phoenix uneventfully. Yet, even as the airliner resumed its customary cruise, the object remained a lingering thought for those monitoring the airspace. A cylindrical object at high altitude, devoid of a transponder and absent from radar returns, constituted a significant threat to flight safety irrespective of its nature. Upon landing, the crew dutifully filed a mandatory pilot report. These reports, typically submitted through both the Federal Aviation Administration's internal channels and the NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System, or ASRS, necessitate that pilots articulate their observations in precise technical terms. The crew detailed that the object was elongated, cylindrical, and wingless, passing directly overhead. Notably, it exhibited no illumination of any kind and seemed to traverse the sky at a considerable velocity. No traffic collision avoidance system alert was activated, nor was any radar advisory dispatched by air traffic control. True to their training, the pilots avoided conjecture in their documentation. Their report was strictly observational. Once it reached the FAA, the agency began a safety assessment. The initial measure involved replaying radar data, conducted with raw, unfiltered returns from the region's long-range systems. Such raw feeds possess the capability to detect faint primary reflections, even those from objects lacking transponders, provided they emit a minimal radar signature. However, the replay yielded no evidence of an unidentified object. There were no blips, no streaks, and no sporadic returns visible. The skies over northeastern New Mexico appeared to be devoid of anything other than scheduled commercial traffic. Subsequently, the automatic dependent surveillance broadcast logs were examined. All commercial aircraft transmit a comprehensive transponder signal comprising altitude, speed, identification, and position. The logs identified every aircraft anticipated to be present at that altitude, no anomalous signals, no discrepancies in altitudes, no sudden jumps in aircraft positions. The ADS-B system remained entirely consistent. Military channels were reassessed once again, as there are instances where high-speed test vehicles, missiles, or advanced drones may traverse restricted airspace. However, on that particular date, the Department of Defense affirmed that no operations could account for the sighting reported by the crew of the A320. The Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, established to analyze unidentified aerial incidents intersecting both military and civilian aviation, received this event as part of standard interagency coordination. They scrutinized the available data but had nothing but the crew's direct observations to work with. Lacking radar or sensor data, the case could not be resolved. Discussions within the FAA shifted to risk assessment, with a cylindrical object moving at high speed near cruising altitude representing a serious hazard. The altitude ranges between flight level 300 and flight level 360 are among the most congested in the realm of commercial aviation. An unidentified object, regardless of its origin, is treated uniformly. It is deemed a separation threat. Safety analysts correlated this sighting with prior unexplained incidents documented along high-altitude routes over New Mexico and Arizona. Some involved reflective spheres, while others were characterized by fast, unlit objects. However, the cylindrical description provided by Flight 229-2 was particularly noteworthy, as it closely resembled established missile profiles, despite the fact that no missile tests were scheduled, nor were any detected by military radar. The FAA undertook a thorough examination of the communications transcript, radar replay, and pilot report, finding no discrepancies with the pilot's account. Nothing in any log suggested potential misidentification. The angle of sunlight on that particular day did not support a satellite glint explanation. Weather balloons, being spherical and slow-moving, do not travel laterally at high speeds, and large drones lack the capacity to reach those altitudes with such velocity. Commercial aircraft cannot operate without lights or transponders either. Consequently, the FAA classified the incident as an unidentified airborne object. This designation is utilized when an object fails to match any recognized aircraft type, has no transponder, and cannot be aligned with radar data. While this is not an extraordinary classification, it simply indicates an object's unknown status. Nonetheless, within aviation circles, particularly among airline pilots, the encounter remained a matter of considerable interest. The clarity of the pilot's description, its comparison to a missile, and the absence of corroborating radar data rendered it particularly striking. Pilots possess an acute awareness of the differences between various aerodynamic shapes. A wingless cylindrical object engenders an immediate recognition that it does not belong to any common aircraft category, be it a jetliner, a helicopter, or even a typical drone. Moreover, the encounter resonated with characteristics commonly seen in other FAA UAP cases. The fast-moving object, the lack of lighting, and the absence of any radar signature have become hallmarks of many UAP reports from pilots. These are objects visible to the naked eye, yet invisible to radar systems designed to monitor all major aircraft. For the crew of American 229-2, the encounter transpired in mere seconds. A fleeting flash, a cylindrical object, and then nothing. Yet, in aviation, those brief moments carry significant implications concerning systemic vulnerabilities. When an object traverses a high-altitude airway without a transponder and without radar correlation, it eludes the safety framework upon which commercial aviation relies. The incident remains open within the FAA's internal records, not because it engenders mystery, but due to insufficient data. There is no means to conclusively affirm or deny specifics about the event. The object existed solely in the perspectives of the crew and the recorded words shared over the radio frequency. Nonetheless, for the FAA's safety monitors, this was sufficient warrant for serious consideration. As at the altitude where American 229-2 was operating, even a transient unknown incursion can lead to significant consequences. On that day in 2021, something crossed the skies that was not scheduled, not anticipated, and not detected by the mechanisms designed to catch everything. The crew witnessed it, reported it with professionalism, and the system had no resolution to offer. The near miss north of Bismarck in 2014 remains one of the FAA's quieter yet more disconcerting aviation anomalies. An event that transpired within mere seconds, amidst clear air at a routine altitude and under the vigilant supervision of one of the most dependable radar regions in the United States. It was a night marked by conditions that favored predictability. Steady winds, cloud bases significantly below the climbing aircraft, and a traffic picture that the controllers characterized as light and orderly. Until the precise moment the crew of a CRJ-900 encountered something unexpected, nothing in the airspace suggested there might be a problem. Suddenly, a dark shape sliced beneath their aircraft, appearing out of nowhere, devoid of lights and lacking any accompanying radar footprint. Having departed punctually, the CRJ-900 was ascending through approximately 14,000 feet when the incident unfolded. Minneapolis Center had taken command of the flight as it moved northward, providing headings and climb instructions that adhered to the established departure profile. Inside the cockpit, the two pilots were engaged in executing the after-takeoff checklist, diligently monitoring engine parameters, fuel flow, and cabin pressure while adhering to the programmed climb as per the flight management system. With TCAS actively scanning, the display showed no conflicts with other traffic. Visibility ahead was outstanding. The flight ascended smoothly, uneventfully, and in silence, a climb that pilots typically appreciate. As the captain adjusted the panel lighting, a sudden dark shape captured his attention, dashing below the aircraft with such velocity that it crossed beneath the nose before he could precisely track it. At that moment, he braced for impact, anticipating the turbulence wake from another aircraft, yet nothing materialized. Instead, the atmosphere was punctuated only by silence. A heartbeat later, the first officer reacted, his posture shifting as he noticed something race beneath them at a rapid pace. The captain's voice remained composed as he keyed the microphone, concealing the urgency that pulsed beneath. "Center, we need to report traffic. Something just passed directly beneath us with no lights at all." The controller swiftly acknowledged, inquiring about the altitude and any directional details the crew could supply. The captain detailed that the object had passed just a few hundred feet below them, close enough to be unmistakably clear. The first officer reinforced this assertion, emphasizing the absence of strobe, navigation lights, or a beacon. In controlled airspace at that altitude, an object that was unlit, was not just unusual but outright perilous. The controller shifted focus to the radar display. The radar picture covering North Dakota, operated by Minneapolis Center, is compiled from several long-range sensors. Bismarck, Minot, Fargo, Dickinson, and additional inputs from the Department of Defense provided a comprehensive view. At 14,000 feet, any aircraft with a physical presence and metallic structure ought to yield at the minimum a faint primary return. A functioning transponder would result in a clear return tagged with altitude, yet the radar sweep revealed nothing. No blips, no stray echoes, and no fading signatures from a missed detection were present, nothing aligned with the crew's account. CRJ, negative contact. We are not showing anything in your area, the controller informed. The captain and first officer exchanged a glance, conveying affirmation rather than confusion. Both were entirely confident of what they had witnessed. It was neither a shadow nor an illusion or a reflection, but rather something that moved with unmistakable intent and speed, slicing beneath them horizontally, as opposed to the drifting trajectory of a balloon or debris. The controller commenced standard protocol, cross-referencing all nearby traffic, checking altitude and direction entries. Every aircraft occupying the region was located precisely where it should be. None exhibited unexpected climbing or descending behavior. No transponder codes had gone offline, and Mode C returns across the sector remained stable. There were no primary targets detected outside their assigned labels. The controller then scrutinized NOTAMs for any active military operations. None were recorded. No special use airspace was active. Grand Forks Air Force Base, which at times engages in unmanned aircraft operations, confirmed that no flights were in progress. Minot Air Force Base reported no aircraft in the vicinity either. Meanwhile, the North Dakota Army National Guard reported no scheduled activities. Everything pointed toward a completely still military presence. Weather balloons were immediately eliminated as a possibility. They typically ascend between 1,000 and 1,500 feet per minute, gently drifting with the wind. They do not navigate laterally at high speeds, nor do they present an unlit or dark profile. Furthermore, the nearest scheduled launch time from the National Weather Service did not sync with the timing of the encounter. As the controller continued to analyze the situation, the crew maintained visual vigilance, scanning the sky ahead for any indication of the unidentified object's return. They adjusted their landing lights and anti-collision lights, not because it would affect the object, whatever it was, but because pilots instinctively revert to maximum visibility settings after experiencing a close call. The first officer glanced at TCAS once more. The display remained devoid of any advisories or approximate targets. The subsequent minutes unfolded in a tense ambiance, quiet yet charged. The controllers persisted in evaluating the sector's radar feeds, while the pilots continued their visual scanning with no further sightings or signs of anomaly, or the turbulent wake that would typically accompany a passing object. At last, the controller inquired whether the crew required an altitude adjustment. The captain declined, reasoning that the object had already passed and that the situation did not appear to persist. He confirmed they would submit a detailed report upon arrival. Hours later, after touching down at their destination, the crew duly filed a formal FAA incident report. It stated that a dark, unilluminated object of indeterminate type had traversed beneath the aircraft at roughly 14,000 feet. The crew characterized its velocity as considerable and noted that its course was horizontal rather than descending. They underscored that visibility was exceptional, asserting that the object did not conform to the characteristics or behavior of any recognized aircraft, drone, balloon, or natural phenomenon. The report deliberately refrained from engaging in speculation, adhering strictly to FAA guidelines that necessitate objective, observable details alone. A safety management system review by the FAA was initiated automatically. Technicians responsible for replaying radar accessed the raw radar data corresponding to the time frame surrounding the encounter. One significant advantage of examining raw data is that it eliminates the filtering algorithms typically employed to reduce clutter during real-time operation. Raw radar can be chaotic, but but is remarkably sensitive, capable of unveiling faint echoes, fleeting primary returns, and movement patterns that may otherwise be overlooked. However, even in this unrefined state, no anomalies were evident. There were no unidentified primary returns, nor any blip signaling an object momentarily passing through the radar beam. The radar logs remained as pristine as the controller had initially observed. Subsequent inspections of ADS-B data followed. Every aircraft in the vicinity was accounted for, with no missing identifiers or altitude irregularities. No unusual fluctuations in transponder signals were noted. The ADS-B network failed to indicate any aircraft with a non-functional or disabled transponder. Coordination with military entities included thorough reviews of logs from Minay Air Force Base, Grand Forks Air Force Base, and regional military radar facilities. Each confirmed the absence of any operations, with no scheduled flights, no unmanned activities, and no tests of any nature occurring during the specified timeframe. Meteorological assessments ruled out the potential for visual illusions. Atmospheric conditions were stable, with temperature inversions being mild and typical for the region. There were no atmospheric distortions, no lightning, nor distant city lights that could have contributed to misidentification. Furthermore, the fact that the object had clearly passed below the aircraft rather than above eliminated the possibility of a reflection on the cockpit windshield. The FAA ultimately classified the encounter as an unknown aircraft, a standard designation for any airborne object that appears within controlled airspace, devoid of transponder identification and lacking radar correlation. This classification does not convey any implication of origin or intent. It merely acknowledges the presence of an unidentified object that occupied navigable airspace at a precise moment and location without any connection to a known aircraft or activity. What rendered this case especially significant internally was not merely the manifestation of something unidentified. Such reports, while infrequent, are not unheard of. Rather, it is the encounter's proximity that stands out. A near miss, even if fleeting, underscores a failure in the system intended to maintain appropriate separation between all airborne entities. At 14,000 feet, where aircraft are either ascending to or descending from cruising altitudes, the airspace ought to be predictable. Regulations surrounding lighting, transponder compliance, and radar coverage exist to ensure that no aircraft can approach a commercial airliner unnoticed. Yet, against this backdrop of stringent regulations, something did. For the pilots, the brush with the unknown lasted only a fleeting moment. For the air traffic controller, it was a brief spark of anxiety, followed by a bewildering absence of corroborating data. For the FAA, it served as a poignant reminder that even the most meticulously monitored airspace can give rise to occurrences that leave no remnants apart from the professionalism of the crew who meticulously reported what they had perceived. Because both pilots were competent, well-trained observers with matching accounts, and because there was no environmental, military, or civilian explanation that could be unearthed, the incident remains one of those unresolved entries within the FAA system, swift, subtle, and disquieting in its unadorned nature. An object, dark and devoid of light, surged beneath a commercial jet within controlled airspace, moving rapidly and without recognition, and then, just like that, it vanished. Cleveland Center, Brightfield, Ohio, in the year 2016. The incident involving Cleveland Center Brightfield in 2016 stands out as one of the more peculiar FAA pilot-reported anomalies, primarily due to the number of professional flight crews that observed the same object nearly simultaneously across different altitudes and flight paths. Unlike many UAP events which involve just a solitary aircraft, this case emerged within Cleveland Center's airspace from the west, garnering visual confirmations from at least 2 commercial airliners and 1 cargo plane, all of whom depicted an object so brilliantly bright that it seemed to radiate its own light rather than simply reflecting sunlight. This incident unfolded in the early afternoon, a time when the upper altitude traffic within Cleveland Center is characteristically steady yet not overly congested. The airspace above the Great Lakes generally exhibits stability in the spring months, marked by high visibility and minimal thermal turbulence. That particular day proved no exception, featuring clear skies, gentle winds aloft, and ceiling conditions that enabled crews to spot for dozens of miles in every direction. It was precisely the type of day when pilots exude confidence in their visual assessments. The initial report originated from a commercial airliner cruising above flight level 350. The crew had just established contact with Cleveland Center Sector 38, which manages a significant expanse of upper Midwest airspace stretching from eastern Illinois toward Lake Erie. The operator assigned a minor route adjustment to the aircraft, and shortly thereafter, the captain contacted the center, exhibiting a tone that was neutral yet attentive, a tone pilots typically adopt when confronting something that does not align with their comprehension of the aerial environment. Cleveland Center, we are observing a bright object on our left side. We are unsure what it is, but it appears stationary or nearly so. The controller sought clarification. The captain elaborated that the object resembled a brilliant white sphere, radiating more brightness than a strobe and unlike any aircraft lighting known to them. It did not flicker, pulse, or exhibit any navigational lights. It merely exuded a steady glow. The first officer contributed that the object appeared too motionless to be a distant aircraft. They had been observing it for several seconds, and its position relative to the horizon remained unchanged. The controller conducted a scan of the radar. Cleveland Center's radar system presented a comprehensive coverage, supported by numerous long-range air route surveillance radar systems, including installations at Oberlin, Lorain, and further north near Detroit. Every aircraft flying above 10,000 feet in that area should produce either a Mode C or Mode S return. Objects lacking transponders typically yield faint primary radar returns, raw reflections portraying dimensions and movement, but lacking identification. The radar, however, displayed nothing. There was no sign of a primary return, no transponder tag, no blip or intermittent echo. The controller responded, indicating a negative contact. There was no reported traffic in the vicinity. The captain acknowledged this information while remaining vigilant. The object continued to glow brightly, remaining stationary and silent. Subsequently, within a span of less than 2 minutes, another airliner made contact from a different flight level. The crew of a westbound jet at flight level 330 reported observing the same luminous sphere. They recounted it in nearly identical words: bright white, non-blinking, and seemingly self-illuminated. The first officer noted that it did not appear to be ascending or descending. Estimating its altitude proved challenging due to its brightness, yet it was distinctly visible against the sky. Cleveland Center initiated coordination with adjoining sectors. The controller consulted Indianapolis Center to verify whether any high-altitude balloons, atmospheric probes, or weather-related radar anomalies were operational. None were found to be active. The controller additionally reached out to Detroit Approach, which oversees lower altitudes near the Great Lakes, and they reported no unusual sightings. Moments later, a cargo aircraft entering Cleveland Center's airspace from the southwest contributed a third independent account. The captain noted that he and his first officer were observing a bright object positioned above their right side, characterizing it as a white sphere or orb, extraordinarily bright, devoid of lights or strobe effect. They speculated that it might be significantly higher than their flight level, perhaps above 40,000 feet, since it appeared small yet intensely luminous. They stressed its immobility. 3 independent crews, 3 perspectives, 3 nearly identical descriptions. The controller reached out to the first aircraft again to determine if the object had shifted position. It had not. It remained brightly lit and stationary. The captain mentioned that, in his opinion, the object did not seem to be sunlight reflecting off another aircraft. The luminosity was constant, not shimmering, lacking the rainbow tint or scattering characteristic of metallic surfaces. At this juncture, Cleveland Center initiated an internal review. The controller broadened the radar sweep, subsequently adjusting the filter settings to permit the display of raw primary returns. On occasion, diminutive objects such as gliders or balloons can generate faint signatures that might get overlooked under standard filtering, but the raw display remained devoid of any return. No primary return indicated the presence of any object. The controller then consulted NOTAMs for the area. No FAA high-altitude balloon launches were scheduled, nor were there any military operations active above the Great Lakes. No restricted or warning zones were in use, and there was no tethered balloon activity, NOAA sampling missions, or university-run atmospheric experiments. The skies were tranquil. The controller also communicated with the Air Force through conventional coordination channels. No aircraft from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Selfridge Air National Guard Base, or any regional military establishment were detected in the vicinity. No U-2 flights, no high-altitude training, and no exercises were underway. Everything indicated an entirely unoccupied expanse of high sky. While Cleveland Center navigated these checks, the object remained visible to at least two of the aircraft. The first crew observed that after several minutes, the object abruptly dimmed, not in a flickering manner, but as if the intensity had been instantly reduced. A second later, the sphere commenced movement. It drifted upward and slightly east, gradually accelerating until it became too diminutive to distinguish against the sky. The first officer characterized it as not ascending like a balloon, but instead as having a steady, controlled descent. The second crew witnessed the same dimming effect just before losing visual contact. The third crew, positioned further away, reported that the object simply faded into the distance, its brightness declining sharply prior to disappearing. Once all three aircraft lost sight of the object, Cleveland Center conducted a thorough check of the radar. There remained no primary return, no altitude tags, no transponder signals, no anomalies detected. The radar appeared devoid of any indications. When the flights landed, all three crews submitted reports to the FAA. The first report delineated the object as a luminous sphere, extraordinarily bright and unlike any recognized aircraft. The second captured it as a steady white orb exhibiting no movement for several minutes. The third characterized it as a bright reflective sphere that rapidly diminished and did not display typical aircraft traits. The FAA's safety management system undertook a formal analysis. Radar playback was scrutinized frame by frame across an extensive geographic area. No raw radar return aligned with the timing or location of the visual accounts. The long-range radar software processing logs were inspected to confirm that no primary returns had been filtered out due to clutter rejection or range folding. The data remained clean. ADS-B logs were assessed, revealing no aircraft lacking transponders. No transponders had gone offline, and no drone activity was logged above 10,000 feet in the region, as their operations are legally restricted at such altitudes. Meteorological data was reviewed, indicating no temperature inversions capable of producing lenticular reflections, no ice crystals, and no reflected glare from the lakes. The sky was remarkably clear on that day. The Air Force confirmed there were no military aircraft, high-altitude balloons, or experimental vehicles operating in or near the region during the time frame in question. Controllers at Cleveland Center engaged in internal discussions regarding the event. They concurred that what distinguished this case was not merely the intensity of the light, but rather the object's stationary presence. High-altitude aircraft, even those at a considerable distance, typically exhibit a degree of movement relative to the cockpit view. Satellites tend to traverse the sky predictably, albeit at a slower pace. Reflections alter with changing aircraft angles. However, this specific object appeared fixed in relation to the horizon, precisely at the location where pilots initially reported seeing it. The Federal Aviation Administration classified the incident as an unidentified airborne object, taking note of multiple pilot confirmations alongside the absence of radar correlation, a lack of ADS-B data, and no viable atmospheric explanation. Without radar tracking, altitude or velocity could not be confirmed. For the flight crews involved, it represented one of those rare instances when the sky displayed something beyond every known aircraft profile. For the FAA, It illuminated the constraints inherent in radar and transponder-based tracking. For Cleveland Center, it served as a case study illustrating how, even on a crystal-clear day, a visual anomaly could emerge, leaving no digital footprint behind. All that remained were the consistent reports from 3 professional flight crews who witnessed the same luminous sphere in the same expansive sky. Like many incidents cataloged as FAA UAP events, this occurrence ended with nothing further documented, nothing else detected, and only the steady radio acknowledgments of pilots reporting an unidentified object that the system could not classify. Turning our attention to a different incident, Seattle Center encountered a metallic Cuban sphere over Washington State in 2019. In contrast to other parts of the United States where open plains afford radar a clear view of the skies, airspace overseen by Seattle Center presents distinct challenges for air traffic controllers. Mountains disrupt line of sight, while the Pacific coast introduces significant clutter. Weather conditions can transform rapidly, sometimes within a matter of minutes. Nevertheless, radar coverage above 30,000 feet is generally dependable, and pilots navigating those altitudes anticipate a clean, consistent picture of what is ahead. The sighting reported in 2019 by a commercial crew soaring over western Washington transpired on a day marked by visibility sufficient to allow for the Cascades to be seen well beyond their usual haze. This exceptional clarity rendered what they observed even more challenging to dismiss. The aircraft had leveled off above flight level 300, traversing westward on a route that would ultimately lead it over the Pacific Ocean. With the climb phase behind them, the cockpit had settled comfortably into the typical rhythm of cruise flight, entailing system checks every few minutes, fuel confirmations, and sporadic position reports. With the sun positioned behind the aircraft, the sky ahead was evenly illuminated and devoid of glare. Such conditions prompt pilots to describe the sky as feeling both empty yet sharp, with every distant object distinctly visible against the cerulean backdrop. As the first officer scanned the exterior, he noticed an anomaly that did not conform to the typical scene. Initially, it appeared merely as a glint, not the pulsating flicker of a strobe light nor the shimmering flash off an aircraft fuselage, but rather an unnatural point of reflection. He observed it for a moment, anticipating the shape would resolve into either a remote airliner or perhaps one of the military transports commonly departing from Joint Base Lewis McChord. Instead, the object gradually became clearer, its geometry undeniably unconventional. The captain noted they were picking up an object at their 2 o'clock position, his voice steady yet tinged with curiosity. It appeared metallic, though he hesitated on how precisely to describe it, possibly spherical. Seattle Center requested confirmation, aware that multiple flights were transmitting on the frequency, necessitating clarity regarding whether the report indicated a potential conflict. The captain reiterated that the object seemed spherical, reflective, and steady, yet not behaving like any known traffic. As the crew continued to survey the object, the first officer leaned closer to the window. What he observed next prompted him to sit up straighter, remarking that it was not just a sphere. Something internally was evident. The captain pressed the transmit key once more, informing Seattle Center they were gaining a clearer view. The object appeared to be a sphere, encasing some kind of cubic shape within it, a detail that was distinct and not merely a reflection. The controllers shifted their complete focus to the radar display. Seattle Center's long-range radar picture is constructed from various overlapping systems: ARSR 4 sites at NEL in Spokane, terminal radars around Portland and Seattle, along with contributions from military installations. The controllers zoomed in on the sector's range, deactivated clutter filters, and activated the raw primary return view. If the object possessed any significant metallic structure, it should have registered at least momentarily. The display remained devoid of contact. After an extensive sweep cycle, the controller reported a negative contact, stating there was no traffic at their altitude. The captain confirmed they still possessed visual contact with the object, which was not engaging in any aggressive maneuvers. It neither climbed nor descended. Instead, it hovered with an unnatural steadiness, seeming almost suspended in the air, drifting in a subtle manner unrelated to the aircraft's path. Had it been a balloon, its motion would have been vertical or swayed smoothly with the wind. If it had been another aircraft, its relative speed would have been unmistakable. Rather, it remained almost stationary. Although small in apparent size, it was close enough for the internal cube to be discernible. It did not rotate around a fixed axis like a drone, nor display the erratic wobble associated with high-altitude weather balloons. Instead, it maintained a shape later described by the first officer as mathematically precise, with the inner cube appearing suspended, not in contact with the sphere's inner surface, almost as if it hovered at the center. The controller conducted another review of military assets in the vicinity. The Pacific Northwest hosts a range of military operations, including F-15s from Portland's 142nd Wing, Navy Growlers from Whidbey Island, and Army aviation units from Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Additionally, it is not uncommon for high-altitude drone tests to take place far offshore. However, there were currently no active advisories, restricted airspace, or logged operations for that altitude or location. The captain, still focused on the enigmatic object, noted that it appeared to be drifting slightly northward. He added that it was not moving in a manner consistent with the prevailing winds, at least not in any recognizable fashion. Seattle Center acknowledged the report and inquired whether any other aircraft within adjacent sectors had visual confirmation of an unusual object. None reported seeing anything out of the ordinary, aligning with the position of the reporting aircraft and the angle of sunlight at the time. The object's reflective surfaces manifested visibility from only particular angles. As the captain and first officer continued to observe it, the object underwent a shift. It did not accelerate as a jet would nor glide gracefully like a glider. Rather, it executed a slow, purposeful motion, one that was linear yet lacked smoothness. The first officer would later characterize it as a controlled drift, as if it were adjusting its position rather than simply traveling with inherent momentum. Then, in an unexpected turn, the object began to ascend. The rate of climbing was not rapid, yet its stability suggested an unnatural quality. Throughout the ascent, it retained its shape and orientation impeccably. The internal cube remained perfectly centered within the encompassing sphere, which reflected sunlight uniformly without any flicker or stutter that could hint at rotation or surface irregularities. As it climbed several hundred feet or perhaps even more, the object shifted towards the northwest and accelerated. This acceleration was sharp, yet not instantaneous, exhibiting a form of control that excluded explanations such as balloons or drifting debris. Within moments, the object had diminished to a size too small to be seen. Rather than fading into the distance like a balloon dissolving into mist, it disappeared solely due to the increase in distance. Seattle Center inquired if the crew wished to express any concerns regarding safety. The captain relayed that the object had not posed a collision risk, but was sufficiently unusual that it warranted documentation. They proactively expressed their willingness to file an Aviation Safety Reporting System report, which the Federal Aviation Administration encourages in instances where events lack straightforward explanations. Upon landing, both pilots independently submitted ASRS reports, their accounts aligning closely. They described a metallic sphere at or near their altitude, with a visible cube suspended within, moving in manners inconsistent with those of either aircraft or balloons. Both emphasized the remarkable visibility conditions and noted the absence of any strobe lights, beacons, or navigation lights. The terminal control system yielded no findings. Radar logs revealed nothing either. The FAA's post-incident review unfolded through multiple stages. Frame-by-frame inspections of radar playback from ARSR-4 sites and terminal radars were conducted, yet no primary returns at any altitude correlating to the sighting were discovered. DSB logs covering the entire region were scrutinized. There were no unregistered flights detected. No dropouts had occurred. All military aircraft operating that day were accounted for. Seattle Center even consulted with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration regarding high-altitude atmospheric tests. None were reported in the area. Institutions conducting atmospheric research with balloons confirmed that no launches had taken place. NASA had no airborne craft operating at that altitude on that particular day. Additionally, the FAA checked in with the Air Force's Regional Coordination Office. No drones, test vehicles, high-altitude lighter-than-air crafts, or exotic military systems were found to be active. Whidbey Island and Joint Base Lewis McChord confirmed there were no unscheduled flights. Meteorological assessments substantiated that the sky presented exceptional clarity, with no cloud formations, ice halos, sundogs, lenticular distortions, or atmospheric refractions that could account for the distinct metallic spherical object, encasing a cube structure. The flight patterns of the object ruled out reflections from another aircraft. The pilots had observed it ascending and accelerating independently. Ultimately, the FAA classified the occurrence as an unidentified airborne object, employing terminology reserved for reports of sightings lacking radar correlation, transponder signals, and conventional explanations. It was not regarded as a safety concern due to its stable relative positioning and absence of collision threat. Nevertheless, its geometry, behavior, and absence from radar monitoring left the case unresolved. For Seattle Center controllers, the incident became part of their collective memory, a highlight discussed during training sessions addressing unusual visual reports or guidance on handling non-radar-based pilot communications. For FAA analysts, it served as an exemplar of how, even with layered radar networks, ADS-B integration, and military collaboration, certain airborne entities may be visually perceived yet leave no trace within tracking systems. For the crew, the brief event crystallized into a razor-sharp experience that challenged their fundamental perceptions of the predictability associated with high-altitude flight. It manifested, retained its shape, exhibited deliberate movement, and then vanished into the pristine blue sky, leaving only the corroborated observations of two professionals who unanimously acknowledged what they encountered. A metallic sphere harboring a cube suspended within it, adrift above 30,000 feet with no discernible origin. The incident recalls the Boston Center cigar object from Massachusetts in 2003. During that year, the upper airspace over the northeastern United States was a meticulously coordinated environment reliant on consistent radar coverage and steady communication between Boston Center and every flight traversing its sectors. The evening of the sighting unfolded much like others at the time. Weather conditions across Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire had cleared after several days of tumultuous weather. The skies throughout the region exhibited remarkable transparency at higher elevations. Pilots reported outstanding visibility and smooth atmospheric conditions. Air traffic routes navigated their regular patterns seamlessly. Every aircraft tag emerged on the radar display precisely where it was anticipated. The aircraft referenced in the report had initiated its descent toward the Boston area. The crew adhered to the established procedures typical for this stage of flight. The captain diligently monitored the rate of descent, while the first officer meticulously cross-checked altitude restrictions. Approach information was thoroughly reviewed. Everything felt routine. The cockpit lighting had been adjusted to the dimmed levels suitable for nighttime, allowing the instruments to emit a soft glow, while the outside world remained cloaked in darkness, save for the glimmering lights dotting the landscape far below. As the first officer scanned the sky ahead, an unexpected anomaly disrupted the comforting cadence of their descent. Initially, the object materialized as a vague silhouette, a mere thin figure lingering at the fringe of what was distinguishable. He anticipated that it would resolve into a distant aircraft as his vision adjusted. However, as their descent continued and the distance closed, the shape sharpened, failing to transform into anything familiar. It lacked wing lights. There was no beacon, there were no navigation lights, no recognizable profile indicative of an aircraft could be discerned. Quietly, he urged the captain to look forward. The captain complied, and both pilots fell into an uneasy silence that lingered for several seconds. What lay before them bore no resemblance to any aircraft they had ever encountered in their extensive careers. The object ahead exhibited a long, even outline. Its color was entirely dark. No visible surfaces suggested the presence of wings or stabilizers. The crew quickly noted that the object was moving laterally across their intended flight path. It maintained a steady bearing, appearing to glide along a predetermined vector. The captain pressed his microphone, requesting traffic confirmation from Boston Center, indicating they were observing an object at their 12 o'clock position. The controller responded, asking for clarification as no targets were visible ahead. The captain reiterated his request, explaining that something was crossing their field of view at a similar altitude. The controller widened the radar scope for an enhanced overview. Boston Center relied on a network of radar sources spanning throughout New England, long-range surveillance from the Cape, high-resolution coverage near the coastline, and both primary and secondary radars inland, contributing to a composite display. If anything substantial had entered the airspace, one of those sensors should have registered it. The controller rescanned the radar data. No traffic was observed, he conveyed. Nothing was present at their altitude, nothing primary. Momentarily, the captain withheld recognition of this information, choosing instead to remain focused on the mysterious object as it continued to traverse their path. The shape remained elongated, and its movement flowed smoothly, devoid of ascension or descent. It held its altitude with unwavering precision. The absence of lights struck the crew as particularly disconcerting. All aircraft operating within this airspace are mandated to display lighting during nighttime hours. Even older models are bound by regulations not to operate without such safety measures. Finally breaking the silence, the captain articulated their sighting, noting they were passing an unlit object, a dark, elongated shape absent of any visible aircraft lighting. The first officer persisted in his observation, noting the absence of cabin windows, no reflective metallic surfaces, no strobe effects, and no movement that suggested rotation or drift. The object advanced with the precision characteristic of an aircraft, yet it lacked any discernible features that would typically indicate an aircraft's presence. The controller inquired if the crew wished for an altitude alteration. The captain politely declined, clarifying that the object had already begun to cross in front of them and did not appear to pose an immediate threat. The crew maintained their focus on the anomalous object for additional seconds until it slipped past left of center and vanished into the cover of darkness. The descent then proceeded without a hitch as they continued along their designated vectors before ultimately landing. Yet, the striking sighting remained vividly etched in the crew's memories. They had encountered something that should have been inconceivable for the airspace they occupied, a long object at altitude devoid of lights and lacking a radar signature. Upon landing, the crew filed a formal report detailing what they had observed. The description was unambiguous. They had witnessed a dark, elongated object traversing their path at a similar altitude. The object's surface appeared seamless and unmarked. It exhibited no external structures, no illumination emanated from it. It did not meander like a weather balloon, but moved with the steadiness associated with controlled flight. They took note of the ideal visibility conditions and the likelihood that misidentification was almost impossible under those circumstances. The review by Boston Center commenced the following morning. A radar playback technician delved into the primary radar data corresponding to the time of the sighting. The radar systems employed by Boston Center in 2003 possessed the capability to capture significant primary reflections from most substantial solid objects. Even smaller private aircraft lacking transponders typically registered as faint returns. However, the playback yielded only tagged aircraft. No unidentified objects emerged. The technician repeated the scan utilizing unfiltered raw data, yet the outcome remained unchanged. No uncorrelated returns surfaced. The next move involved examining secondary surveillance and preliminary automatic dependent surveillance broadcast records. Though ADS-B was not yet compulsory, several carriers and private operators had started to utilize early versions. The data indicated no unidentified transponder activity, no anomalous broadcasts, nor unexpected altitude deviations. Every aircraft within the system exhibited behavior precisely aligned with expectations. The FAA reached out to military installations across the region, including Pease Air National Guard Base, Otis Air National Guard Base, as well as naval and Army aviation facilities frequently conducting training flights. None had aircraft operating in the vicinity. There were no unscheduled sorties, no test flights, and no deviations from established operations. Nothing corresponded with the timing or location of the sighting. An examination of weather balloons also took place. None had been launched around the time of their sighting. Even if one had been, weather balloons ascend predictably and do not maintain horizontal trajectories at mid-altitudes. They also bear no resemblance to elongated or cylindrical shapes. The National Weather Service contributed atmospheric assessments confirming clear conditions. There existed no atmospheric refraction, no peculiar layers or optical distortions, and no remnants of contrails at that altitude, nothing capable of fostering the illusion of an elongated object traversing the sky. The flight crew underwent interviews conducted by Airline Safety Management, resulting in statements that echoed one another. The first officer highlighted the object's consistent motion, while the captain pointed out its uniform form and the total absence of any aircraft lighting. Both crew members dismissed the likelihood of misinterpreting a balloon or a reflection. This object was marked by a distinct structure, advancing along a path that appeared deliberate. It resembled nothing they had encountered previously. The Federal Aviation Administration recorded the incident as an encounter with an unidentified airborne object. This classification refers to visual observations that remain unmatched to radar, transponder activity, meteorological phenomena, or any known aircraft. The designation does not provide an explanation. It merely acknowledges the presence of an object within navigable airspace that remains unidentified and unsupported by data. Among the controllers at Boston Center, this case lingered in their memories, largely due to the absence of radar corroboration. The radar in that area is known for its reliability. Should an object of notable size have traversed the path of an aircraft, it would typically yield at least a fleeting primary reflection. Yet the screen remained devoid of any indication. The pilots clearly observed something. The radar did not reflect their sights. When these two realities diverge, the Federal Aviation Administration possesses no classification but that of the unknown. For the crew, the encounter was ephemeral. For the Federal Aviation Administration, it evolved into yet another situation in which the trained visual acuity of professionals detected something that the technological apparatus could not. A dark object, elongated and steady, navigated through controlled airspace before vanishing into an otherwise unremarkable sky. This anomaly regarding the radar playback, noted in New Mexico in the year 2018, began not with a pilot's observation, but rather with a routine system check executed at the Federal Aviation Administration facility. This geographical area encompasses vast stretches of desert alongside elevated mountainous regions, presenting various challenges to radar performance based on altitude. Yet, radar coverage at higher elevations above the commonly lower flight levels has proven stable over many years, and technicians have grown to depend on the system's reliability. On the morning in question, technicians tasked with reviewing overnight traffic logs anticipated an ordinary session. The review was a standard practice where technicians scrutinize for recording faults, monitor system alerts, and ensure filters active during live operations did not obscure any significant targets. The first sign of an anomaly surfaced when a radar specialist detected a singular bright return during the playback. This return only registered on a single sweep of the radar. The point was sharp, clear, and devoid of any smearing or fading. It appeared once and then disappeared. In isolation, an anomalous return isn't out of the ordinary. Occasionally, ground clutter or atmospheric conditions yield returns that are extraneous. However, what rendered this return particularly noteworthy was its altitude. Positioned well above the typical clutter zones, it fell within the flight levels where aircraft are generally recorded through secondary surveillance data. The technician decided to examine the sequence again. The same point glimmered back at them. One sweep displayed it distinctly, yet the succeeding sweep showed nothing, as did the one that followed. All other aircraft remained compliant, behaving according to expectations. The tags, positions, and altitudes held stable. Only this solitary point made a fleeting appearance. Initially, the specialist presumed it might be a radar artifact. However, the radar playback software permits adjustments to sensitivity, gain, and range settings, capable of revealing subtle primary returns. The technician retraced the playback, this time amplifying the sensitivity to its maximum. The point persisted in its clear appearance. It lacked the traits of ghosting or a multi-path reflection. Moreover, it did not manifest in an area where clutter typically gathers, but appeared precisely where one would expect a solid airborne object to materialize. Another technician joined the examination, verifying the exact timestamp and location of the return. The point aligned with airspace adjacent to a standard route employed by commercial flights flying at higher altitudes. At the moment the return occurred, no aircraft occupied the nearby vicinity. The closest jet remained several miles distant, steadfast at its assigned altitude, exhibiting a clear transponder signal with no deviations. The playback recorded the object emerging in open airspace before disappearing just as suddenly. The technicians communicated with the supervisor responsible for the facility that morning, who then requested an exhaustive scan of the recorded data. They broadened the playback window beyond the initial sighting. The radar log from that hour revealed ordinary activity, documenting every commercial aircraft crossing the region with proper identification. The playback revealed no signs of a transponder malfunction. No aircraft appeared untagged. Nothing else encroached upon the site of the singular primary point. Once the team ascertained that the return did not stem from a basic software anomaly, they proceeded with additional verifications. They confirmed that the radar facility had reported no equipment issues. The team scrutinized the radar status log, discovering no outages, maintenance alerts, or warnings of atmospheric disturbances. Radar conditions were reported as optimal. No procedural filter appeared to have altered or obscured any segment of the log data. The subsequent step involved a comparison of the information with data from neighboring radar facilities. New Mexico benefits from coverage provided by several long-range radars that overlap at elevated altitudes. If an object of significance had traversed the airspace, it stands to reason that another radar facility would have detected it. Accessing the shared radar mosaic, the team checked an extensive timeline surrounding the anomaly. None of the adjacent radar sites recorded a similar incident. Only one radar captured the event. Just one sweep picked up the trace. In pursuit of more clarity, the supervisor reached out to the Regional Air Traffic Control Center to ascertain whether any pilots had made reports during the time frame in question. The controllers reported no unusual traffic communications. None of the flight crews had sought navigational vectors, nor had anyone requested changes in altitude due to unknown objects. The frequency recordings for that hour reflected routine, mundane activity. There were no pilot communications that could be associated with the radar anomaly. The center also investigated potential causes of high-altitude activity, examining recent weather balloon launches. While it is true that such balloons can occasionally trigger primary radar returns, all launches for the day were accounted for. The documented trajectories indicated no balloon was near the altitude where the return had occurred. Their ascent rates did not correspond. No launch had taken place in proximity to the anomaly's location. Moreover, the FAA consulted with the National Weather Service to check for atmospheric phenomena that might produce false returns. The examination revealed no unusual temperature gradients, no storm cells, and no moisture surges. The morning atmosphere above New Mexico was characterized by dryness and clarity. Next, the technicians moved on to military coordination. The area encompasses numerous military airspace blocks, where high-altitude training sometimes occurs. However, every military unit contacted confirmed no operations were underway during the time frame linked to the anomaly. At that moment, no aircraft, either manned or unmanned, occupied that airspace. No tests were in progress. All restricted areas were clear. At this juncture, the anomaly had successfully passed initial assessments without explanation. The technicians initiated one further review, shifting their focus to raw radar energy levels instead of processed imagery. Raw radar data is intricate and often noisy, requiring expert interpretation. This data can unveil faint returns that are not detectable on standard displays. The team replayed the raw data surrounding the moment of the anomaly. The solitary point remained discernible. It appeared robust enough to imply that a genuine object was present, yet not sufficiently strong to create a multi-sweep track. Following this revelation, the regional center called for a thorough safety review. Even though the incident entailed no pilot reports and posed no apparent risk, any unidentified return within controlled airspace mandates documentation. The review encompassed radar engineers who analyzed the characteristics of the returns. They substantiated that the shape of the point aligned with a legitimate reflection. It lacked the attributes of a ground reflection and did not exhibit the smearing typical of interference. Instead, it mimicked a clear hit on an object that was either small or positioned at a considerable distance from the radar site. In addition, the engineers scrutinized the sweep intervals. Radar systems rotate at a predetermined rate. For the point to be visible in one sweep yet absent in the next indicates either extreme velocity, a dramatic altitude alteration, a narrowly reflective surface, or an object that exited the radar beam almost immediately. Each of these possibilities comes with constraints. High-altitude aircraft typically produce multiple sweeps. Objects ascending or descending remain visible in subsequent sweeps. Even hypersonic vehicles tend to leave behind partial tracks, but in this scenario, the object emitted only a single point and offered no further indications. The FAA ultimately concluded that the anomaly did not match a conventional radar malfunction. The point did not correlate with a software echo, a radio frequency spike, or a calibration artifact. It behaved as if a tangible object darted through the radar beam and escaped the volume before the subsequent rotation. The occurrence was classified as a radar-only unidentified airborne object, a notation that signifies sightings lacking visual confirmation. Most FAA anomalous cases originate from pilot observations. Thus, a radar-only case is rare, and one involving a single sweep at altitude is even rarer. The technicians who undertook the review recalled the incident not due to its dramatic nature, but due to its defiance of classification. Every facet of the system functioned as anticipated. The environment presented no interference. The equipment registered no faults. Yet the recording displayed a return. It appeared once, only to vanish thereafter. It was situated within airspace that should have been thoroughly unoccupied at that instant. The case remains unresolved in the FAA logs. No further anomalies emerged in that sector in the subsequent days or weeks. The same radar facility continued its regular operations. Commercial flights traversed the region seamlessly. Nothing about the anomaly repeated itself, just a singular, bright point emerging in a lone sweep. No aircraft, no logs, no elucidation. It entered the record quietly, leaving only the data point that resisted integration into the system that recorded it. ASRS Sphere at flight level 370, United States, 2007. The pilot who submitted the 2007 ASRS report recounted how the sky that afternoon appeared plain, in the way clear high-altitude skies often do. There was nothing visually striking about the conditions. The air remained clean, and the horizon carried a faint haze layer far below. The jet stream exhibited a gentle curve, devoid of the abrupt corridors that sometimes provoke turbulence. The aircraft was settled comfortably at flight level 370. All systems operated normally. The autopilot maintained altitude with minimal correction. At that height, the sky feels private, with ample spacing between aircraft, making traffic predictable. Most of the workload revolved around minor checks and occasional discussions with the other flight crew member. The pilot recalled the flight entering a tranquil stretch with no weather deviations, frequency congestion, or aircraft in front. It was the kind of setting where any unusual sight in the visual field would be immediately noticeable, simply due to the background remaining so unchanged for an extended period. The pilot was gazing out the left side of the cockpit for no particular reason. It is common for pilots to look outside, often simply to observe other aircraft. Yet, suddenly, something unusual caught the pilot's peripheral vision. Though it was not illuminated brightly, it bore a reflective quality. Initially, the pilot considered it might be a distant aircraft shimmering in the sunlight. However, upon closer inspection, the reflection did not flicker, nor did it exhibit any of the usual characteristics of air traffic. It remained stationary relative to the aircraft's movement for several seconds. Leaning forward for a clearer view, the object came into better focus. It appeared as a sphere, uniformly reflective, not metallic in the conventional sense, but smooth and continuous, lacking edges or seams. There were no lights, strobe signals, or navigation markers visible, nothing to indicate that it was an aircraft adhering to FAA regulations. The pilot quickly scanned the traffic display, which confirmed the absence of any targets, resolution advisories, or traffic warnings. The airspace around them seemed devoid of other entities, which heightened the significance of the sighting. If another object occupied the sky at an altitude of 370 without transmitting a transponder signal, it posed an unknown risk to standard separation protocols. Drawing the attention of the other crew member, the pilot indicated the strange object they both observed quietly for a few seconds, in search of an immediate explanation. The sphere exhibited an unusual stability, neither drifting upward nor downward. It did not follow a predictable trajectory, but seemed almost anchored in position, despite the high-speed flight of the aircraft. The pilot chose to monitor the object for a few additional seconds before reaching out to the air traffic controller. If the object disappeared during that brief interval, the pilot would chalk it up to a reflection, possibly sunlight bouncing off something at a lower altitude. But the sphere persisted, remaining constant in its position just off the left side of the aircraft, stable, without flickering or morphing. Finally, the pilot initiated the radio call. The communication was straightforward, as the pilot confirmed to the center that there was no traffic at their 9 o'clock position, slightly above. They noted that TCS did not show any indications, but that they had indeed spotted something. The controller responded in a neutral tone, relaying negative traffic at their 9 o'clock and confirming that the area remained clear. The pilot shifted their gaze back to the sphere, which stayed above the horizon, appearing bright but not glowing. The surface reflected light rather than emitted it. Estimating its size proved challenging. It could have been small and close by or extensive and far off. The pilot's impression was that it did not seem large, yet it was unmistakably solid. At that moment, the object began to shift. The motion was neither rapid nor erratic, but rather a slow drift. It progressed horizontally, a change in position that seemed deliberate yet subtle. The pilot continued to observe the drift, finding that it maintained an altitude consistent with flight level 370. This detail felt particularly concerning, as objects rising through such altitudes without transponder signals are atypical within the controlled airspace environment. The other crew member suggested adjusting the cockpit lighting to see if they could obtain a clearer reflection of the sphere. While cabin glare was minimal, changing the lighting sometimes eliminates window reflections. They adjusted the overhead panel brightness. However, the sphere remained unaffected and continued its motion. The crew verified that no instrument reflections were aligned with the angle of their sighting. The sphere shifted slightly ahead of the aircraft before beginning to accelerate. This acceleration was neither abrupt nor startling. It was steady and increasing. The spherical object continued forward without any vertical ascent. After several seconds, its relative size diminished, indicating it had moved to a greater distance, ultimately vanishing against the expanse of the sky. It did not blink out suddenly, rather it became too small to discern. In the span of an instant, the object was no longer visible. The pilot informed the controller that the sighting had concluded and that no other objects were present. The controller acknowledged briefly, confirming once more that no traffic appeared in that section of airspace. The remainder of the flight transpired without complications or turbulence. No operational challenges arose. The only peculiar moment had been those fleeting seconds when the sphere had captivated their attention. Upon landing, the pilot chose to file an ASRS report on a voluntary basis. The ASRS program encourages the documentation of irregularities without fear of backlash. Its purpose lies in gathering data aimed at enhancing aviation safety. The pilot meticulously recorded all pertinent details, describing the object as a reflective sphere at an altitude of 370. The motion characteristics of the sphere were documented with precision. Emphasizing that this was neither a reflection nor a recognized aircraft, the pilot also noted the absence of TCS responses. This detail held particular significance. TCS monitors transponder signals from surrounding aircraft, and if the sphere had indeed been an operational aircraft equipped with a functioning transponder, TCS would have detected it. Likewise, if it had been a glider, a balloon, or a drone, the altitude at which it was sighted would be atypical for those categories. While weather balloons can be spherical in shape, they do not remain fixed in position for extended durations, and they continuously ascend. Furthermore, they cannot drift horizontally in such a controlled manner. The FAA subsequently reviewed the ASRS submission as part of its standard follow-up procedure, examining radar logs pertinent to the time frame of the sighting. Long-range radar in that region noted no untagged primary returns. Primary radar often detects aircraft that lack transponders, but no such returns existed. Every aircraft operating in controlled airspace was accounted for in the logs, and the sphere left no footprint on the radar system. Meteorological conditions were also evaluated. The weather at 370 was stable, devoid of atmospheric distortions, ice crystals that could foster reflective illusions, or any unusual light phenomena. The conditions proved ideal for high-altitude visual clarity, bolstering the validity of the pilot's account. In light of this, the FAA carefully coordinated with ongoing military operations. All active military training areas were confirmed inactive, with no scheduled or unscheduled flights occupying the sector. There were no indications of missile tests or high-altitude drones. The airspace maintained a notable calmness, leading to a review that concluded without a clear rationale. Consequently, the case was categorized neutrally, a designation assigned when the FAA is unable to correlate a sighting with any known aircraft or natural phenomena. Although the report was devoid of implications regarding risk, it noted that the object had acted without approaching their aircraft. Thus, it remained simply identified as unidentified. What distinguishes this incident is the ordinariness of the sighting itself. There were no erratic movements at astonishing speeds, no dramatic twists, and certainly no disruptions in control. Instead, there was just a reflective sphere, stable and silent, occupying the serene high-altitude air and observed by a competent crew in calm conditions. The sphere lingered long enough for scrutiny before it drifted away and vanished from view. The pilot recalled the encounter not as a theater of chaos, but as an episode noted for its precision. Even though it did not belong in that airspace, it had nonetheless made its presence felt. A reflective sphere at 37,000 feet, seen clearly, recorded with precision, unmatched by radar or any existing aircraft records. It emerged quietly and left no trace, standing out as one of the most elementary unexplained entries in the ASRS archive. The incident, labeled as San Francisco Approach Object California 2016, illustrates the evolving character of San Francisco approach control, especially during late afternoon hours. It transforms into a peculiar blend of tranquility and heightened pressure that only controllers experienced in the Bay can genuinely comprehend. Aircraft converge from the east, north, and south, all needing to navigate through constricted paths that leave scant room for adjustment. Oceanic winds and geographical features compress the airspace at specific elevations, with 11,000 feet being one of those marked points where this compression becomes markedly apparent, resulting in converging traffic. The separation of aircraft dwindles, and every instruction takes on heightened significance. On the day of the sighting in 2016, the sector was exhibiting its habitual demeanor. Visibility spanning the interior of California was exemplary. The bay glistened in clarity, with no strong winds registered beneath 15,000 feet. The marine layer remained well offshore, and most pilots checking in conveyed a sense of relaxation. Frequency congestion was low, and operational workload remained steady and consistent. The inbound aircraft linked to this case had entered the sector just before the local sunset. The crew seamlessly transitioned into their familiar descent procedures once they passed through the transition altitude. The captain maintained a firm grip on the controls while the first officer diligently monitored descent restrictions and verified the next fix. As the aircraft descended on profile through 13,000 feet, the controller directed the crew to hold at 11,000 feet for several minutes to ensure proper spacing behind another arrival. The crew's acknowledgement echoed in clarity. 11,000 holding. Inside the cockpit, a rhythm emerged, familiar to crews worldwide. Instrument scanning, visual observation, radio monitoring, quick briefings. This rhythm continued uninterrupted until the first officer paused during a routine examination of the outside world. A minuscule point above the horizon captured the corner of his gaze. It was neither bright nor glaring. It simply existed. The first officer leaned slightly closer to the window, drawing the captain's attention with his movement. When asked quietly what the first officer was observing, the reply came with uncertainty. The first officer acknowledged he was unsure, just that it was something ahead, slightly elevated. As the captain lifted his gaze from the instrument panel, he too discerned it. The object did not resemble a distant aircraft. It bore no visible surfaces nor any discernible contour. It appeared as a solid dark mass against the pale sky, remaining conspicuously still, which was precisely what drew their interest. At that altitude, stationary entities were anomalies. Everything else drifted with the wind, gliding across the sky at an observable pace. The first officer took another brief moment before noting that it remained unmoving. The captain hesitated for a fleeting instant before initiating communication with approach control, requesting a traffic check at R12. The controller who fielded the call had already been scanning the radar when the transmission arrived. With renewed focus, the controller surveyed the display once again. The sector appeared to be free of any anomalies. Each return correlated with expected aircraft, with no untagged signals or unusual indicators. The controller promptly responded, clarifying that there was no traffic at their 12 o'clock position, assuring them that they were clear in that area. Once again, the captain turned his attention outside. The object remained stationary, and the first officer leaned forward, both hands anchored on the glare shield, studying the form more intently. It now seemed slightly oval, characterized by a flat visual texture rather than one that reflected light. It showed no signs of pulsing or wobbling. Its fixity felt distinctly out of place. The captain communicated to the controller that they had an object above and forward, emphasizing that it had no lights. Widening his radar scan, the controller adjusted the filters once more. The radar sweep continued to return clean. The controller requested the crew to confirm their altitude, to which the captain replied without hesitation that it was 11,000 precisely. The controller zoomed in on a narrower segment of the display, searching for any primary return. Typically, primary radar in that area would capture anything of pertinent size. Even smaller aircraft cast faint signatures. Yet, the screen remained devoid of any indication. The controller keyed the microphone to convey that there was nothing where they were directing their attention. They requested the crew to reiterate their position. The captain offered the bearing relative to their aircraft, while the first officer added that the object stayed static. The controller inhaled slowly, checking the next inbound aircraft trailing behind them. That crew had not reported any sightings. Their angle differed slightly, and they may not have had a visual of the phenomenon. The controller then inquired of a corporate jet operating at a similar altitude if they had witnessed any anomalies in their vicinity. The response from that crew indicated nothing but an unobstructed sky, Nothing appeared amiss. Within the cockpit, the first officer adjusted the positioning of their seat, leaning closer to scrutinize the clear expanse outside. The object remained stationary, its position unwavering relative to their aircraft. At that juncture, the first officer discreetly uttered a remark that would find its way into the FAA documentation. "It is holding altitude completely still." The captain acknowledged with a succinct confirmation, indicating awareness of the situation. "I see it." Suddenly, the object commenced movement. The shift was gradual and unhurried, initiating a slow series of lateral adjustments to the right. It maintained a level altitude throughout this motion, neither climbing nor descending, nor exhibiting any rotational behavior. Instead, it glided sideways at a consistent pace that departed significantly from the typical behaviors observed with balloons. The captain promptly relayed this update to the controller, noting that it was now in motion off their right side at the same altitude. The controller resumed scanning the area. Still, no disturbances were detected. The radar displayed only the familiar targets in range. The controller then posited whether the crew required a vectoring away from the object. The captain declined, assuring there was no risk of collision. The enigmatic object remained above the aircraft, moving further away as they continued their descent trajectory, which remained secure. The first officer continued to observe intently. The object advanced with a composed assurance, crossing a stable lateral expanse, its form unchanged. It did not bear any metallic qualities, nor did it demonstrate signs of propulsion. It persisted as a dark silhouette gliding through the sky, its origin shrouded in uncertainty. After a brief interval, the object abruptly ceased its movement. It did not decelerate in a conventional manner, but simply came to a standstill and hovered in place for several seconds. The crew remained transfixed, the profound silence filling the cockpit during those moments, deeply etched into the memories of flight crews long after their flights concluded. As if that was not enough for the day, the object then initiated a gradual ascent. This climb was noteworthy not for its drama, but for its steadiness as it rose until its color merged seamlessly with the brilliance of the sky above. Initially appearing as a diminutive dark spot, it gradually faded, ultimately reducing to a mere point before vanishing altogether. The sky returned to its tranquil state. The captain once again contacted the controller, confirming the object was no longer visible. The controller documented this update and transitioned the aircraft to the next frequency. The descent proceeded without interruption. Approach instructions were reinstated, flaps were deployed, and speed was lowered. Focus shifted towards landing preparations. Upon reaching the gate, the crew completed their standard report. They documented the observation with clinical precision, an unidentified dark object cruising at over 11,000 feet. It exhibited no lights, exhibited no initial movement, then lateral motion before ascending vertically. They detailed visibility conditions, affirming with certainty that the object was neither a reflection nor a recognized aircraft. The report took the usual route through established channels, prompting an FAA review a few days later. The first order of business was to examine the radar playback. However, the playback yielded no results, no primary or secondary returns, with no unaccounted targets discerned. The recording remained pristine from start to finish. Subsequently, the FAA analyzed ADS-B logs. Every broadcast from the airborne craft aligned with its registered identity. No unfamiliar signals emerged, nor were there any recorded altitude anomalies. A weather analysis followed, revealing no atmospheric conditions capable of producing a dark visual illusion at over 11,000 feet. The atmosphere was noted for its purity, devoid of layers capable of suspending debris, and no temperature inversions that could distort object appearances existed. A review of balloon activity concluded similarly, with no launches or drifting platforms identified. The reality remained that weather balloons do not hover at such altitudes or maintain a motionless state for prolonged periods, nor do they facilitate steady lateral movement followed by a quiet vertical ascent. Engagements with military coordination ensued next, wherein every facility within the vicinity confirmed no active flights, unmanned vehicles, training exercises, or offshore testing. The designated airspace remained serene during the hour of the sighting, leading the FAA to classify the case under the label reserved for instances when a crew observes an object eluding detection, unidentified airborne object. This classification refrains from drawing conclusions about the nature of the sighting, merely acknowledging the presence of something unidentifiable, unmatched to any known aircraft, radar track, atmospheric event, or sanctioned operation. Controllers who subsequently reviewed the case noted a particular detail that lingered in their minds. This sighting transpired within a corridor characterized by an extremely low likelihood of anything unrecognized. 11,000 feet during approach to San Francisco constitutes one of the most meticulously controlled segments of airspace in the vicinity. Nothing ought to hover there, drift without lights, or ascend quietly into the azure without leaving a trace on any sensor. And yet, something had done precisely that, witnessed by two trained observers yet undetected by radar, present long enough to merit careful examination and departing without a single trace in a sky that remained orderly and clear soon thereafter. Thus, the case holds its place as one of the more disconcerting entries from that year. The airspace was known, conditions were optimal, and protocols were adhered to rigidly. Yet, an object manifested precisely in an area where it should not have been. It entered the record silently, and it departed in the same inconspicuous manner. While this primary journey has drawn to a close, if slumber has not yet claimed you, allow yourself to relax as we transition into a compendium of brief narratives, unique encounters expressed in hushed tones. The Japan Airlines radar enigma, occurring on November 17, 1986, over eastern Alaska airspace, United States of America. The sky remained clear at cruising altitude, with radar displaying nothing but the expanse of open air. Japan Airlines Flight 1628, a Boeing 747 cargo freighter, had been airborne for several hours, traversing its standard routing from Paris to Tokyo with a scheduled layover in Anchorage. Aboard the aircraft were three crew members: Captain Kenju Taruchi, a seasoned pilot and former fighter with over 10,000 flight hours, First Officer Takanori Tamapuji, and Flight Engineer Yoshio Tsukuba. They had smoothly entered U.S. airspace over Alaska, cruising at 35,000 feet, at precisely 5:11 in the evening. Local time, as the aircraft neared the eastern reaches of the Alaskan interior, an anomaly materialized on their radar scope. An object exhibited erratic movements. Moments later, the crew visually identified it. Two small, round, luminescent crafts hovered in tight formation. Unlike the typical blinks emitted from conventional aircraft lights, the radiances of these objects pulsed steadily, and their maneuvers deviated strikingly from standard practices seen in either commercial flights or military operations. Positioning themselves off the port side of the freighter, the crafts began to mimic the trajectory of the 747, pacing it with an almost sentient precision. The crew gazed in astonishment as the objects executed sudden vertical ascensions coupled with rapid decelerations, performances unfathomable by any aircraft known at the time. The objects then surged ahead, aligning directly in front of the Boeing as though engaged in an escort mission. Captain Taruchi would later recount this extraordinary incident during official statements and interviews. He characterized the crafts as two smaller vessels and one substantial mothership, with the diminutive objects taking on a rectangular shape, radiating a beam of light that flooded the cockpit. The illumination was so intense that it temporarily obscured the visibility of the flight instruments. Taruchi sensed a warmth radiating from the unknown crafts that touched his face through the cockpit windows. He compared the appearance of the objects to a spacecraft plucked from the realms of science fiction, noting that their aerial choreography defied the laws of aviation as he understood them. But then, the situation escalated dramatically. Approximately 10 minutes after the initial observation, a colossal dark mass emerged behind the aircraft. Taruchi described the entity as spanning the size of two aircraft carriers and resembling a walnut in shape, oblong, with various panels or structures adorning its surface. It loomed ominously behind the 74-7, maintaining a close, constant distance. Despite the late hour, the moonlight provided sufficient clarity for the crew to discern its form. Both the first officer and the flight engineer corroborated the sighting. At precisely 5:19 in the evening, Captain Tarucci initiated communication with the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, at the Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control Center, relaying the bizarre occurrence. Initially, air traffic controllers detected no anomalies on their radar screens, but within moments, they began observing a primary return, a non-transponder-based radar echo near Flight 1628's position. The FAA embarked on a mission to substantiate the sighting. Military radar systems at Elmendorf Air Force Base and surrounding facilities soon began picking up sporadic signals that corresponded to an unidentified object trailing the Japanese aircraft. In light of the unfolding situation, air traffic controllers inquired whether the flight crew wished to adjust their altitude or perform evasive maneuvers. Tarucci assented, attempting a descent and executing multiple course alterations to evade the pursuing craft, yet the entities resolutely maintained their position. Controllers directed a United Airlines flight and a United States Air Force C-130 cargo plane to the vicinity for visual verification. The C-130, however, reported no visual confirmation, but by that time, the objects had inexplicably vanished from both the sky and radar screens. Throughout the ordeal, the Japanese crew remained rattled, but managed to keep their composure, safely continuing their flight to Anchorage. Upon landing without incident, the saga was only beginning. An immediate and thorough post-flight investigation commenced. Captain Tarucci documented extensive written reports along with diagrams depicting the shape and motions of the crafts. His fellow crew members substantiated the key elements of the sighting. The FAA initiated an inquiry involving meticulous analysis of radar data, cockpit voice recordings, and interviews with both controllers and military personnel. The collected evidence laid bare that a primary radar return had, in fact, been recorded near Flight 1628 during the time frame of the encounter. Unlike standard radar responses emitted by commercial aircraft equipped with transponders, this particular return lacked any identifying markers and did not coincide with any scheduled traffic. The radar signals lent solid support to the claims made by the Japanese crew, indicating that an unknown object had shadowed them for over 30 continuous minutes across hundreds of miles of airspace. John Callahan, who served as the FAA Division Chief of Accidents and Investigations at the time, became intricately involved in the inquiry. He later revealed publicly that a discreet meeting took place among officials from the FAA, CIA, FBI, and Department of Defense shortly after the incident transpired. During this gathering, the collected radar data, voice tapes, and crew testimonies were reviewed within a classified environment. Callahan further noted that representatives from the CIA specifically instructed attendees to remain silent about the occurrence, claiming that the sighting had never occurred. They confiscated the data and voice recordings, effectively burying much of the case for years. However, Callahan retained copies of the original data, including the radar tapes and voice recordings. He later unveiled these documents to the public in the 2000s, affirming both the validity of the original event and the federal response. Despite the compelling evidence, Captain Tarucci faced significant backlash. Shortly following the incident, Japan Airlines grounded him, citing the overwhelming media attention surrounding the case. Although he was reassigned to an administrative position, the official reasoning was ostensibly unrelated to the incident, leading many to speculate that his credibility had been compromised not due to fault, but rather because he dared to articulate an event that defied conventional explanation. The incident captured the interest of both national and international media outlets. Newspapers across the United States and Japan reported on the sighting, and prominent television networks aired segments featuring translated statements from Tarucci along with radar footage. Interest surged in 1987 when the FAA officially acknowledged the authenticity of the radar data and voice recordings. A spokesperson confirmed that something had indeed been detected on radar in proximity to Flight 1628, but emphasized that no conclusions could be reached regarding the object's origins. UFO researchers lauded the Japan Airlines radar incident as one of the most thoroughly documented cases in history, combining expert pilot testimony, real-time FAA communications, and radar evidence from both civilian and military sources alongside the physiological responses from the aircraft's crew. Few UFO incidents display such a convergence of observational and instrumental corroboration, particularly in controlled airspace monitored by multiple agencies. Skeptics, however, proposed several alternative explanations. Some contended that Taruchi had mistaken the planet Jupiter or reflections cast upon the cockpit glass. Others speculated that the observed phenomena could have been weather-related, like ice crystals or stray light from distant terrestrial sources. Yet, these assertions failed to account for the corroboration provided by radar, the persistent visual tracking conducted by all three crew members, and their detailed descriptions of a large, structured, maneuvering craft, notably the impressive mothership object that loomed behind the aircraft. Even within military and aviation circles, debates surrounding the case remained unresolved. Former FAA official John Callahan vocally criticized the government's choice to withhold key details, arguing that the implications for air safety alone demanded openness. In the years that followed, Captain Taruchi remained resolute in his retelling of events. In rare interviews, he reiterated his observation of a tangible, intelligently controlled object, one that adeptly responded to his aircraft's movements, maintained its position relative to him, and pulsated with radiance and heat. He stressed that, as a military-trained aviator and seasoned commercial pilot, he possessed the expertise to recognize various aircraft silhouettes and behaviors. What he encountered was beyond anything he had ever witnessed. The Japan Airlines radar case stands as a distinctive anomaly in the global narrative of UFO encounters, not due to vagueness, but because of its clarity. Unlike incidents reliant solely on eyewitness accounts, this event was meticulously recorded, cataloged, and scrutinized by numerous agencies, only to be quietly set aside afterward. To this day, the raw radar footage remains scarce, and much of the government's internal deliberations regarding the event has yet to be declassified. However, the elements known are compelling enough. A crew of trained aviators observed something substantial and maneuvering, which appeared on military radar, was reported live, and trailed them for nearly 400 meters before vanishing. The legacy of Flight 162. 8 continues to resonate, not within any official database, but through aviation logs, radar records, and in the memory of a pilot who gazed into the Alaskan night sky and witnessed something inexplicable, something none have yet managed to articulate. Cairo Delta UFO, 1982. The Nile Delta during the early 1980s was bustling with its quintessential rhythm. Farmers toiled amidst lush fields of clover, irrigation canals sparkling under the sun, enveloped in the perennial hum of life in one of Egypt's most fertile regions. It was here, in 1982, that one of North Africa's most enigmatic UFO incidents unfolded. The initial observers were farmers laboring late into the twilight near Bilbaz, situated northeast of Cairo. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, they spotted a brilliant light hanging in the dusk sky. At first, they presumed it to be a helicopter, perhaps dispatched from the nearby Egyptian Air Force Base, yet the brilliance was unsettlingly incorrect. Too steady, too intense and hauntingly silent, the object hovered low over the fields, casting a glow across the irrigation canals, before gliding with deliberate finesse from one end of farmland to the other. Tools were dropped and calls erupted among the farmers. Families emerged from their homes, magnetized by the peculiar luminescence. Witnesses later converged on a shared description. A sizable oval object radiated a white light at its core, encircled by a reddish halo, measuring approximately 20 meters in diameter. It hovered with a muted presence, dipping slightly as if to inspect the landscape, then unleashed a beam of light that swept meticulously across the fields. Livestock were the first to react. Donkeys brayed, dogs barked incessantly, and cattle cowered in their enclosures. One farmer recounted that his ox stubbornly refused to budge for hours afterward, as if gripped by sheer terror. The onlookers were torn between awe and dread. Children wept as the beam crossed their homes, while elders murmured prayers in desperation. Authorities did not overlook the event. Bilbay Air Base, a significant installation for the Egyptian Air Force in the Delta, hastily mobilized to assess the unidentified object traversing their airspace. Radar operators allegedly monitored a slow-moving unknown target that appeared and vanished without warning. Although pilots prepared for an intercept, they never received a scramble order. Whether attributed to hesitation or confusion remains ambiguous. Simultaneously, local police were inundated with reports from villagers detailing a burning sun hanging over the fields. Officers arrived in patrol cars and were met with their own sighting of the object. One sergeant later confided that he had never seen his men so visibly unsettled. They described the craft as behaving unlike any airplane. It glided soundlessly, briefly accelerated in bursts, then came to a complete halt. The Ministry of Civil Aviation also became involved in the inquiry. Cairo International Airport, located less than an hour's flight away from the Delta, ranks among the busiest hubs in the region. Thus, any incursion into controlled airspace is treated with utmost seriousness. Controllers on duty that night reportedly documented the presence of an unidentified luminous object moving erratically, visible to pilots yet elusive on secondary radar screens. Although these accounts were never disseminated to the public, fragments of testimonies resurfaced years later within aviation circles. Back in the fields, the encounter intensified. Witnesses assured that the light beam projected from the craft appeared to scan the ground intentionally. Crops illuminated as if under a concentrated spotlight, while canals shimmered with the reflected glow. Several farmers asserted that they observed smaller lights resembling sparks or probes detach momentarily from the craft, only to reunite soon after. A young boy, then 12 years old, recounted witnessing 3 stars darting around the main object like fish in water. The display persisted for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, with a sudden burst of acceleration, the object tilted, climbed sharply, and vanished into the upper atmosphere. Villagers observed until the radiant glow dwindled to a mere speck among the vast expanse of stars. The quiet that enveloped them was pierced only by the barks of dogs and the murmur of hesitant voices. The following morning, investigators from both the Air Force and the local police descended upon the fields for examination. In one specific area where the beam had lingered, they discovered patches of scorched clover. The earth beneath these blemishes had hardened in an unnatural manner. Farmers were adamant that such marks had not existed prior to that night. Samples were subsequently collected, yet the results of their analysis were never made public. For the Egyptian Air Force, the occurrence posed a considerable concern. Bilbay Air Base had been a vital pillar of the nation's air defense, housing fighter squadrons dedicated to safeguarding Cairo and the Suez Corridor. An unidentified craft lingering unchallenged within their designated airspace constituted a significant embarrassment. Military personnel documented the incident, but classified it, unwilling to publicly acknowledge the event. The Ministry of Civil Aviation similarly maintained silence. In the early 1980s, Egypt was in the midst of expanding its international stature in pursuit of both investment and stability. Admitting that unidentified aerial objects had breached regulated airspace near Cairo would have severely tarnished that carefully crafted image. As a consequence, civilian controllers were directed to simply record anomalous light phenomena in their logs without any further elaboration. Local newspapers carried only vague allusions to strange lights observed by villagers in the Delta. Editors avoided directly associating these reports with UFOs, a term perceived as foreign and sensationalistic. Nevertheless, among the residents, the tale rapidly circulated. Families recounted the night when a luminous craft illuminated their fields. Farmers welcomed visitors to view the scorched grounds. Children sketched pictures of the oval light in their notebooks. Skeptics attempted to provide alternative explanations: helicopters, weather balloons, even reflections from experimental flares. Yet, these theories were swiftly dismissed by the locals. Helicopters create noise. The object had been silent. Balloons float aimlessly. The object zipped about and came to an abrupt halt. Flares descend. The object had hovered for 20 minutes. None of the conventional explanations accounted for what had been witnessed by hundreds. In subsequent years, researchers cataloged the Cairo Delta incident as one of the most noteworthy cases in North Africa. Its confluence of mass sightings, electromagnetic effects, animal behaviors, and physical evidence elevated it beyond mere speculation. The engagement of both the Egyptian Air Force and the Ministry of Civil Aviation conferred an institutional significance to the event, despite both entities remaining tight-lipped regarding their findings. For those who experienced it, the memory has endured over time. Farmers continue to speak of the night the sky became illuminated and the canals radiated light. Children who once hid beneath their blankets transformed into adults who retold the story with precise detail. Police officers who were on shift confessed privately, many years later, that they had witnessed something inexplicable. Today, the Cairo Delta UFO remains a compelling enigma within Egyptian ufology. Unlike momentary flashes or mere rumors, this incident was widespread, public, and acknowledged internally by the very institutions tasked with securing Egypt's skies. No experimental craft, atmospheric anomaly, or foreign incursion has adequately explained the occurrence. For the farmers in the Delta, it was never a matter of conjecture. They had observed the oval craft, seen its beams sweep across their fields, and felt their livestock panic in its wake. For the Egyptian Air Force, it represented a security issue, a stark reminder that an incursion into their airspace could transpire unannounced. For researchers, it stands as one of the most compelling examples of the unexplained throughout the Middle East. In the spring of 1982, amidst Egypt's agricultural heart, the routine of plowing fields and irrigating canals was interrupted by the extraordinary. The night that the object suspended over the delta remains remembered not through speculation, but through first-hand accounts. Farmers, police, airmen, and controllers were all compelled to recognize that something real had appeared and then vanished, leaving behind scorched earth and an unsettling silence that has never been entirely reconciled. In 1973, long before ascending to the presidency of the United States, Jimmy Carter openly disclosed that he had been a witness to a UFO sighting. At that time, Carter was serving as the governor of Georgia, positioning himself as a figure exemplifying integrity and transparency. His willingness to discuss his experience set him apart from many politicians, particularly in an era when UFO sightings remained largely dismissed or ridiculed. However, Carter's sighting did more than simply serve as an intriguing footnote to his life story. It ignited a series of events that reportedly captured the interest of shadowy figures, often described as the Men in Black, thereby injecting a layer of mystery into his future attempts at disclosure. The encounter itself had actually taken place earlier, in 1969, while Carter was running for governor. He was attending a meeting of the Lions Club in Leary, Georgia, alongside around 10 others, when they witnessed a bright object hovering in the evening sky. Carter later characterized it as a radiant orb that shifted colors while hovering silently before moving on. He was adamant that it did not resemble a conventional aircraft, weather balloon, or any astronomical body. The experience left a profound imprint on him, and in 1973, he submitted a formal report to the International UFO Bureau detailing what he had observed. When questioned by the press, Carter did not evade the subject. He openly acknowledged that he had encountered something unidentified. However, he took care to clarify that he did not interpret it as being of extraterrestrial origin. Instead, he proposed that it was likely an unknown natural phenomenon. His candidness endeared him to some, while raising eyebrows among others. Few public figures, particularly those in politics, were willing to associate themselves with reports of UFOs. It was in the wake of his report and his public remarks that the peculiar visits commenced. Numerous individuals who were close to Carter during his gubernatorial and early presidential bid later recounted being approached by unusual men, garbed in official-looking attire, who urged them to refrain from encouraging Carter to delve deeper into discussions about UFOs. The unfolding scenario bore a striking resemblance to the notorious men in black encounters frequently reported by everyday citizens across the nation. These figures were often described as clad in dark suits, operating unmarked vehicles, and communicating in an unnaturally measured tone. They vaguely introduced themselves as federal agents, but never provided any identification. One particular anecdote, carefully preserved within UFO literature, detailed the experience of a volunteer from Carter's campaign who had been vocal about the governor's readiness to discuss his sighting. Within just a few days, 2 individuals, attired in black suits, appeared at the volunteer's residence, claiming to be government representatives. They posed pointed inquiries regarding what the volunteer had heard Carter articulate and cautioned him against discussing those conversations with the public. The men's tone was not explicitly menacing, yet the implied message was unmistakable. Carter's sighting was not a subject for public amplification. Additionally, there was an account from a member of Carter's staff in Georgia who had discreetly encouraged him to be more forthcoming regarding his interest in UFOs. Soon after this encouragement, the staffer reported an unsettling experience of being followed by a dark sedan over the span of several days, with tinted windows obscuring the driver's identity. When the staffer eventually confronted the car by pulling over, it simply drove away, vanishing down a side street. Though he never caught a glimpse of its occupants, the event left him feeling profoundly uneasy. The most disconcerting narratives involved Carter himself. While he never openly acknowledged any visits from the men in black, certain researchers later suggested that individuals within his inner circle had hinted at such meetings. One researcher, recalling events years later, shared that a former aide had revealed that Carter had received warnings from individuals in authoritative attire, advising him not to pursue the UFO topic during his presidency. According to this account, Carter took the admonition to heart, potentially explaining why his early vows of transparency eventually gave way to a conspicuous silence once he assumed the presidency. During the campaign of 1976, Carter made a notable pledge. If elected, he vowed to declassify all UFO information in the U.S. government's possession, framing this promise within the context of honesty and public accountability, asserting that citizens deserve the truth. However, once in office, that promise seemed to dissipate. When confronted by journalists regarding this change, Carter insisted that disclosing such information could jeopardize national security. This marked a stark transformation from his previous openness. For many, this shift served as evidence that Carter had indeed faced pressure, not necessarily from the classic men in black, but from shadowy figures within the intelligence community whose methods were not significantly different. Whether these pressures manifested as silent threats, classified briefings, or visits from mysterious officials, the outcome was consistent. In an abrupt shift, Carter ceased discussing the matter. Skeptics contended that he had merely grown more cautious after grappling with the intricacies of classified intelligence. They posited that once he entered the Oval Office, he recognized that the UFO issue was intertwined with military technologies, spy satellites, and other sensitive areas. From this perspective, his reticence was a matter of practical political strategy rather than intimidation. Yet, adherence to the belief in UFO phenomena pointed to the striking parallels between Carter's sudden withdrawal and the experiences of numerous ordinary witnesses. Consider how often citizens have reported visits from agents seeking to suppress their stories after sightings. If such tactics were wielded against everyday people, why not against a politician whose words could resonate with far greater impact? What makes Carter's situation particularly fascinating is the intersection of his personal sighting, his public declarations, and the accounts of reported visits. Unlike most men in black encounters, which typically befall marginalized individuals, This case revolved around a man poised to attain the highest political office in the land. If the men in black were indeed real and their mission was to stifle awareness of UFOs, then Carter posed one of their most formidable challenges. Researchers, including Timothy Green Beckley and Jerome Clark, chronicled these supposed follow-ups, viewing them as part of the broader men in black narrative. They observed that the accounts shared strikingly similar traits to other documented cases: pale men clad in ill-fitting suits, unmarked dark vehicles, mechanical vocal patterns, and admonishments to refrain from pursuing the subject further. Despite these narratives never receiving direct confirmation from Carter, the consistency of the reports implied that his willingness to discuss the topic attracted unwanted attention. In the ensuing years, Carter seldom revisited the subject. He maintained his original position, asserting that he had encountered something unidentified, though not necessarily of extraterrestrial provenance. When questioned about why he did not advocate for UFO disclosure during his presidency, he cited concerns regarding national security and shifted the conversation elsewhere. Yet, for those who closely monitored his story, this reticence appeared less like caution and more like suppression. The case of Jimmy Carter undeniably serves as a pivotal entry in the lore of Men in Black, bridging the divide between ordinary witnesses and political authority. Here stood a man who had every incentive for transparency, known for his commitment to honesty, who nonetheless chose silence after encounters with enigmatic figures. Regardless of whether one perceives these figures as intelligence operatives, psychological symbols, or beings from another realm, their influence was evidently profound. They guaranteed that the UFO promise made by a sitting president would never materialize. For believers in the existence of the Men in Black, Carter's narrative stands as validation of their power, indicating that their reach extends far beyond farmers and truck drivers. They extend their influence into the very corridors of power, ensuring that even those at the highest levels of government remain compliant. For the skeptics observing these events, the accounts serve as a stark reminder of how secrecy intricately weaves through the fabric of politics, demonstrating that even the most earnest leaders must grapple with the confines of what can comfortably be disclosed. Whichever perspective one adopts, the implications of Carter's UFO sighting, along with the shadowy visits that ensued, remain indisputable. This moment exists as one of the rare occasions in which the mystique of the celestial intersected with the machinery of politics, leaving a legacy marked by lingering questions and an aura of silence. The event at Haneda Air Force Base radar in 1952, Japan, encapsulates this bewilderment. On the muggy evening of August 5, 1952, the atmosphere over Tokyo buzzed with an unusual vibrancy. At Haneda Air Force Base, a pivotal American facility in post-war Japan, radar operators and pilots alike became witnesses to what would unfold as one of the most significant UFO sightings of the early Cold War era. This case encompassed visual observations from the ground, corroborated by radar data from multiple stations, alongside the dispatch of jet interceptors that, ultimately, failed to engage with the unidentified intruder. Within the agenda of Project Blue Book, this incident would become yet another perplexing entry among the growing catalog of radar visual cases, instances wherein trained military personnel encountered and monitored objects that eluded conventional explanations. As the clock ticked towards 11 p.m., operators situated in Haneda's control tower discerned an anomalous target materializing on their radar displays. The blip stood out, distinct, potent, and moving at speeds that hinted at realities beyond mere atmospheric disruption. Initially, controllers speculated it might be a miscalculation. However, moments later, the target re-emerged, showcasing remarkable maneuverability. In contrast to the erratic signals commonly produced by meteorological factors, this contact exhibited a steady and dependable trace, hinting at a tangible entity in motion. News of this anomaly rapidly circulated, prompting additional radar operators to verify the sighting. Nearby air defense stations corroborated the findings, effectively ruling out the possibility of a rogue instrument. For nearly 40 minutes, the controllers tracked the enigmatic target as it glided across Tokyo Bay, at times lingering in place before executing rapid bursts of speed, only to abruptly halt. While radar watchers remained glued to their screens, airmen on the ground began reporting a bright white light hovering in the heavens. Initially appearing immobile, it shone steadily against the darkened backdrop. Suddenly, without any warning, it darted off at astonishing velocities, halting instantaneously before shifting in another direction. Witnesses were left astounded by the object's uncanny velocity shifts, capabilities that no ordinary aircraft of that era could possibly match. One control tower operator later recounted the object as a dazzling bluish-white light, unlike any celestial body or navigational beacon. Others observed a faint pulsing emanating from the light as it traveled, yet soundlessly glided through the firmament. With radar readings and visual confirmations multiplying, Air Force authorities at Haneda made the decision to dispatch jet interceptors. F-94 Starfires, some of the most sophisticated jet fighters of that period, were launched into the night sky for reconnaissance. As the interceptors ascended, radar operators vectored them towards the unusual contact. For a few nerve-wracking moments, it seemed the jets might successfully engage. Pilots reported glimpsing the light briefly ahead of them, radiating brightly against the inky sky. Yet, just as they prepared to intercept, the object surged away from their grasp, disappearing from their radar screens at extraordinary speeds. With each attempt to close in, the object either vanished from sight or inexplicably veered away, leaving pilots pursuing mere emptiness. The interceptors remained airborne for more than 90 minutes, yet they never achieved a successful engagement or even a clear identification of the target. Ultimately, low on fuel, the F-94s had no choice but to return to base. Continued tracking persisted even after the jet's return, as radar operators maintained their watch over the mysterious object. At various intervals, it appeared to hover almost without movement, and at others, it sped across the night sky with velocities unmatched by any existing aircraft. The elusive blip would fade, reappear, and then maneuver in ways that defied the norms of known aviation capabilities. Ground observers continued to witness the enigmatic light, describing its sudden shifts in motion and eerie ability to halt abruptly in mid-air. The activity only came to an end in the early hours of August 6th. By that time, dozens of Air Force personnel had either tracked or seen the object, making it one of the most well-documented radar visual cases in Asia during the 1950s. The investigation led by the Air Force Project Blue Book commenced almost immediately. Reports were meticulously collected from radar operators, pilots, and ground witnesses. The comprehensive logs, which included photographs of radar scopes, were dispatched to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio for further analysis. Nonetheless, the official explanation remained unconvincing. Blue Book classified the incident as anomalous propagation attributed to atmospheric conditions. Essentially, this claim indicated that radar signals were bouncing off temperature layers within the atmosphere, resulting in false targets. Such a rationale failed to satisfy many involved in the incident. The radar operators were resolute in their belief that what they had tracked was a solid moving entity. Their extensive experience enabled them to differentiate between spurious returns and authentic aircraft, and this incident, they asserted, was categorically distinct. Furthermore, the simultaneous visual confirmations of a bright maneuvering light directly contradicted the assertion that it was merely a radar mirage. Several individuals intertwined with the case remained steadfastly convinced of the Haneda object's reality and its inexplicable nature throughout their lives. The pilots who endeavored to intercept expressed palpable frustration over pursuing something that appeared consciously evasive, darting away each time they approached. For the radar operators, the case represented one of the clearest demonstrations of a genuine unknown, tracked, verified, and pursued, yet unresolved. The Haneda incident unfolded during the very same summer as one of the most well-known surges of UFO sightings in American history, the Washington National Airport sightings of July 1952. In both scenarios, the corroboration between radar and visual observations aligned seamlessly, leading to the scrambling of interceptors, with the objects executing maneuvers beyond any recognized aircraft capabilities. That summer, the Air Force grappled with escalating public demand for answers and entreaties from Congress regarding the mounting tide of reports. Although Haneda received less attention in the United States, it belonged to this worldwide phenomenon of unexplained aerial occurrences. For the Air Force, conceding that unidentified crafts were traversing both American and Allied airspace posed significant political risk. Consequently, the notion of anomalous propagation emerged as a frequently employed rationale to diminish the significance of these radar visual instances. Nonetheless, the tenacity and uniformity of the reports rendered it challenging to fully persuade either the witnesses or the general populace. Today, the Haneda AFB radar visual case stands as one of the most compelling entries in Project Blue Book. It engaged skilled military personnel, featured numerous radar confirmations, independent visual sightings, and involved attempted interception by jet fighters. The official explanation attributing the phenomena to radar mirage continues to incite debate, especially given the visual elements in the accounts of the object's rapid maneuvers. Researchers frequently juxtapose Haneda with other radar visual incidents like those at Washington National and Mined AFB, recognizing them as prime examples of UFO encounters that defy conventional dismissal. The patterns indicative of these encounters, spanning continents marked by radar tracking, visual corroboration, and unsuccessful interceptions, point toward a phenomenon of global scope rather than localized occurrences. In reflective contemplation, beneath the humid skies surrounding Tokyo Bay, dozens of men observed or monitored an object that should not have been present. It hovered, darted, and evaded jet interceptors, leaving merely the glow of its illumination and the reverberation of frustration within the voices of pilots unable to seize it. Project Blue Book classified it as atmospheric interference. Yet, for those who monitored the radar scopes and those who gazed skyward during that fateful encounter, certainty remained unshakable. The Haneda incident was undeniably real, shrouded in mystery and firmly etched into memory, a moment when the enigmatic entity navigated effortlessly past one of America's most secure installations in the Far East. Meanwhile, new echoes of the uncanny reverberated as the Canary Wharf UFO incident materialized in 1993, right in the heart of London, England. Canary Wharf, still in the throes of development during that time, boasted its gleaming skyscrapers that symbolized a nascent financial district rising almost from the ground up. At night, the glass facades mirrored the glow of sodium street lamps, while security personnel conducted their rounds through incomplete lobbies and quiet offices. It seemed a bastion of order and predictability until a September evening, when those guards glanced skyward and beheld something anomalous above the towers that defied any sense of normalcy. Shortly after 11 p.m., a cadre of private security guards was patrolling the perimeter of One Canada Square, then the tallest building in the United Kingdom. Their responsibilities were straightforward: ensure security, check entrances, and monitor surveillance cameras. One guard later recounted how the night commenced with a serene atmosphere, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic. However, one guard caught sight of a glow traversing the building's glass facade. Initially perceiving it as a mere reflection, he took a cautious step back and craned his neck upward, only to reveal the source: a vast triangular craft gliding silently above the tower. Shouting for his colleagues, it wasn't long before 5 men were collectively aimed skyward. They reported the craft as colossal, its underside adorned with faint steady lights and its triangular silhouette unmistakable. The most unsettling aspect was the absence of sound. In the bustling heart of London, the noise of aircraft was a familiar constant, yet this object floated silently above the towering structures. At 11:12 p.m., the Metropolitan Police received their inaugural emergency call. The dispatcher recorded a security guard's voice, urgent yet composed, reporting that there was something hovering over Canary Wharf that was neither an airplane nor a helicopter, and that it was enormous. Within minutes, additional calls poured in, not only from guards but also from residents in nearby apartments overlooking the Isle of Dogs. Each caller provided consistent descriptions of a massive dark craft suspended motionless above the towers. The police documented the calls as suspicious aerial activity, dispatching a patrol car to investigate, although officers would later admit there was little they could do beyond confirming what was already visible. In addition to the guards and residents, others within the vicinity witnessed the spectacle, including taxi drivers stationed at late-night ranks who directed their attention to the sky and office cleaners on the upper levels of unfinished buildings, who described seeing a dark wedge obscuring the stars. The descriptions shared a striking consistency: triangular, immense, silent, with lights outlining its perimeter. The peculiarity of the incident was further heightened by its urban context. UFO sightings were typically associated with open rural skies, desolate highways, or remote airbases. Yet here, amidst the pulsating heart of London's financial district, where construction cranes still loomed over newly erected towers, dozens of individuals were witnessing something extraordinary in one of the most densely populated environments conceivable. By 11:30 p.m., at least one unit of the Metropolitan Police had arrived on the scene. Officers engaged with security personnel and scanned the heavens. According to subsequent reports, they too observed lights above the tower, although their official account remained cautious. The record in the duty log that night simply referenced multiple calls regarding aerial lights over Canary Wharf as unresolved. Internally, the case was passed along to the Civil Aviation Authority, or CAA, which oversees air safety within London's airspace. The CAA reached out to Heathrow and London City airport controllers, attempting to ascertain whether any scheduled flights matched the descriptions provided, only to find that radar logs exhibited no incursions into restricted air corridors. Officially, the skies were declared clear. The absence of radar corroboration confounded investigators. Generally, substantial objects, particularly those of a metallic composition, ought to have registered on radar. However, operators at London City Airport later communicated to researchers that they observed nothing unusual on their displays. This discrepancy, characterized by significant visual sightings coupled with a lack of radar feedback, echoed patterns seen in other well-documented UFO incidents. For the security personnel, the lack of radar evidence was insignificant. What they observed, they firmly asserted, was both tangible and real. Several of them subsequently provided interviews to British UFO investigators, steadfastly maintaining their accounts over the years. One guard notably highlighted that the object was comparable in size to a football pitch, asserting that such a scale could not be easily mistaken. Its presence was undeniable. Neither the Metropolitan Police nor the CIA released a public statement regarding the incident. In a city already attuned to the specter of terrorism threats during the early 1990s, unaccounted aerial action above its financial center was not a topic for press releases. The occurrence was discreetly noted and categorized. Nevertheless, news of the event spread swiftly through local circles, leading researchers to gather detailed testimonials from security guards, residents, and taxi drivers, all recounting the same narrative. Skeptics contended that the guards and locals had indeed misidentified a formation of aircraft or even reflections from cranes and glass facades. Yet, the triangular silhouette, its enormous dimensions, and above all, its profound silence, rendered such explanations difficult to entertain. Commercial airplanes traverse defined flight paths into Heathrow, and none linger silently above Canary Wharf. Helicopters produce noise. Reflections do not possess the ability to hover. Some proposed the possibility of a stealth aircraft, perhaps a U.S. testing platform operating from a British base. However, no documented record indicates such technology over central London during 1993. Additionally, even stealth aircraft emit engine sounds and require authorization for controlled airspace clearance. The sighting above Canary Wharf was not an isolated event. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, reports of triangular UFOs surfaced across Europe and North America. The Belgian phenomenon from 1989 to 1990 yielded numerous radar visual cases of large triangular craft. Sightings in the United States described analogous silent wedges gliding over towns and highways. The London event corresponded seamlessly with this broader trend, hinting at a collective phenomenon rather than a mere case of misinterpretation. For the witnesses, the memory remained strikingly vivid. Some took to penning formal statements even years later, adamant about the authenticity of their experiences, despite facing mockery. Residents continued to share the account discreetly, and researchers cataloged this incident as one of the most compelling urban UFO sightings in the United Kingdom. Yet, officially, the case remained unsolved. The Metropolitan Police regarded it as a cluster of unexplained calls, while the Civil Aviation Authority registered no radar validations. Lacking photographs or official recognition, it never gained the spotlight of more prominent cases like Rendlesham or Calvine. However, for those who beheld the triangle above Canary Wharf, it was a moment forever etched in memory. The Canary Wharf UFO retains its enigmatic status. It was immense, triangular, and eerily silent. Guards, locals, taxi drivers, and police officers all bore witness to its existence. Documented by emergency services, yet absent from radar, its presence above London's financial core bestowed upon it a singular distinction, a revelation that the extraordinary could manifest anywhere, even in the bustling heart of a city redefined. For a contemporary era. Pompano Beach, Florida, United States, 1962. It moved with a lifelike grace, devoid of wings and sound, a silvery form twisting beneath the luminous sea. Coast Guard Petty Officer Thomas Lindley would later reflect on this night. His witness account, chronicled for subsequent scrutiny by the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, retained its weight through the years. On the evening of October 17th, as the quiet Florida coast braced itself between hurricanes, the beaches of Pompano were illuminated enough to reveal the horizon even after dusk. Fishing boats traced slow arcs of light across the water, and from the shoreline, the steady rhythm of surf against the sand echoed softly. Just before the stroke of midnight, an unexpected spectacle would disrupt the tranquility, thus imprinting itself in the annals of UFO history. This would become known as the Pompano Beach cigar. The initial observation came from a civilian pilot, Charles R. Osgood, who was navigating a light twin-engine aircraft southward from Daytona toward Miami. At 11:05 p.m., while flying at 5,000 feet, Osgood spotted a long, slender object moving parallel to the coastline, approximately 5 miles offshore. It glimmered with a soft metallic sheen that reflected moonlight, while simultaneously seeming to emit its own gentle glow. He promptly contacted Miami Air Traffic Control to inquire about any logged activity within that sector. The controller affirmed that none existed. Shortly thereafter, another observer, Petty Officer Thomas Lindley of the U.S. Coast Guard station at Pompano, communicated with his superiors to report a bright orange-white horizontal light over the ocean, advancing slowly to the north. The details corresponded precisely with Osgood's observations. From his viewpoint atop the watch platform, Lindley employed binoculars to track the enigmatic object. He described it as cigar-shaped, markedly elongated compared to its width, glowing steadily with a slight fluctuation, as if something pulsated within. Lindley's written report, later incorporated verbatim into NICAP's Florida regional files, conveyed, "Observed elongated luminous object, estimated length 150 to 200 feet, altitude 1,000 to 2,000 feet. Object moved slowly north over the ocean, turned east, gained altitude rapidly, and vanished into the haze. No sound. Duration, 4 minutes. By midnight, 3 distinct calls recounting the same object had reached the Broward County Sheriff's Office, all stemming from motorists along the beach highway. One driver remarked that the object seemed to tilt erect before ascending, resembling a silver tube standing vertically. Another witness reported the object's brightness, likening it to that of a flare, yet noted its movement was deliberate and controlled. The following morning, the Fort Lauderdale News published a brief article with the headline, "Strange Light Over Pompano, Coast Guard Perplexed." The article included Lindley's assertion that he had never observed anything behaving in such a manner. He was cautious in his remarks, maintaining that it certainly was not a plane. That was one certainty he could provide. In a swift response, Miami's subcommittee initiated an inquiry a few days later. Investigator Robert P. McKenna, a retired air traffic engineer, went to both the Coast Guard station and the lighthouse point where civilians had congregated during the sighting. His meticulously recorded notes detailed the weather conditions that night: wind coming from the south-southeast at 5 knots, visibility extending to 20 meters, a barometric pressure of 30.04, and a temperature of 76 degrees Fahrenheit. There were no storms present, no lightning, and no scheduled aircraft exercises. McKenna's report prepared for Washington included a thorough reconstruction of the object's trajectory based on the angles provided by the pilot and the Coast Guard. The luminous cigar had traveled around 12 miles north along the coastline before ascending at an estimated 15-degree angle, speeding beyond visual range in less than 10 seconds. Reviewing the radar logs from the Miami Center for that time period, no registered targets appeared in that sector, despite optimal radar conditions. A local fishing crew anchored half a mile offshore later informed investigators that they, too, had witnessed the same phenomenon: a metallic spindle gliding low above the surface of the water, illuminating the ocean in streaks. Captain Luis Navarro described the reflection as resembling daylight beneath it, intensely bright and even, unlike the focused beam of a searchlight. By late October, NICAP's regional office had gathered 6 independent witness statements. While the phrasing varied, the visual imagery conveyed was consistent: a long, solid form glowing orange or silver, entirely silent and capable of rapid vertical ascension. McKenna classified the incident as Visual Category 1, indicating high reliability, and emphasized the overlap of testimony from trained observers, including a pilot, Coast Guard personnel, and numerous civilians. When the principal report reached NICAP headquarters in December 1962, it was cataloged as Case 62-1-0-1-7, associated with Pompano Beach, Florida, referencing an elongated object. The file comprised 17 pages filled with typed transcripts, weather charts, a map illustrating the positions of witnesses, and a concise technical appendix that drew comparisons between the object's performance and known aircraft. Specifications. The conclusion succinctly stated, "Unidentified aerial device observed under excellent conditions by qualified observers." Object exhibited extraordinary motion and illumination. In subsequent years, the Pompano case became a frequent subject of examination, largely due to the cigar-like description, a shape that resonated with numerous other encounters along the Atlantic coast in the early 1960s. Nico's collection noted similar incidents occurring that same year near Savannah, Georgia, and Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, where witnesses recounted glowing cylindrical crafts moving silently above the water's surface. The behavioral consistency of these reports prompted investigators to explore the possibility that they represented a recurring phenomenon traversing the coastline. Coast Guard Petty Officer Lindley remained resolute in his account. During an interview with NYAP in 1964, he reiterated the precision evident in the object's movement. It altered its trajectory without banking, simply sliding sideways as though it effortlessly resisted any force. When asked if it might have been a meteor, he offered a smile. Meteors do not decelerate or pause to hover. McKenna's technical analysis appended to the file calculated the object's apparent angular velocity using the pilot's recounting. He concluded that if the craft's actual length reached 150 feet, which aligned with the Coast Guard's estimate, then its acceleration during the ascent phase must have surpassed 15 g, far exceeding the structural tolerances of known aircraft from that period. Despite this remarkable acceleration, there was no sonic boom, heat trail, or accompanying sound during the climb. Over the subsequent months, more fragments of correspondence were received. A letter from a local radar technician dated November 2nd indicated an unusual burst of interference that had momentarily appeared on his scope at 2310, coinciding precisely with the sighting. He characterized it as a vertical streak reminiscent of static perspiring through the air, lasting less than 2 sweeps. While he could not assert any connection, McKenna incorporated it into the appendices. For NICAP, the Pompano file illustrated the type of event they most valued: well-documented, succinctly reported, and devoid of embellishments or rumor. It involved observers familiar with aircraft, stable weather conditions, and verifiable timing. The combination of airborne and seafaring witnesses facilitated triangulation, a rarity in most UFO reports. When Richard Hall compiled his 1964 evidence review, he highlighted the Florida case under a section designated for structured objects at low altitude. His summary preserved a matter-of-fact tone, detailing a metallic or luminous elongated body observed visually by the Coast Guard pilot and multiple civilians. Notations regarding hovering horizontal motion and rapid vertical acceleration were cited, alongside the lack of a conventional explanation. In 1965, NICAP cross-referenced Pompano Beach with another significant cigar-shaped incident from Red Bluff, California, noting comparable descriptions of light diffusion, elongation, and silence. Statistically, such incidents comprised less than 2% of all UFO reports, yet they stood among the most consistently detailed. What renders Pompano remarkable, even decades later, is the measured tone of its witness accounts. The spectators did not assert potential contact nor extraordinary behavior. The craft neither posed a threat nor attempted communication. It manifested, hovered, maneuvered, and then vanished without a trace. Yet, its movements were precise, almost mechanical, defying aerodynamic principles, as though it was guided by an understanding of air that entirely disregarded its inherent resistance. In 1968, when NICAP's records were reviewed for congressional briefings, the Florida incident stood out prominently, serving to illustrate both structured and dynamic observations made by trained personnel. Hall's concluding annotation, inscribed in his meticulous handwriting, conveys a sense of dedication as he reflects on the matter. Duration sufficient to observe form. Independent witnesses consistently reported that the object performed an intentional ascent, devoid of sonic disturbance, implying its nature as a tangible entity. Over the years, the file thinned from repetitive handling, the photographs fading steadily. The Coast Guard station in Pompano, which had been a focal point, underwent reconstruction, leading to the dismantling of the observation platform where Lindley had once stood. Nevertheless, his typed statement endures as one of the most vivid records housed within the NICAP archives. Not a single word was ever altered. Ultimately, the record of the Pompano Beach cigar remains archived in the NYAP records as a shard of clarity, not because it rendered proof of anything, but due to its unwavering consistency in retelling. A silver object traversed the sea deliberately, witnessed by individuals whose professions demanded precision, alongside citizens motivated by nothing but a desire to convey the truth. On that fateful night by the shore, Lindley noted how the light danced upon the waves, steady as the moon, yet somehow more immediate, more vibrant. His account continues to serve as a key entry point for the case file. Beneath his observations lies a chart of bearings, alongside a compilation of tide notes and the careful script of an investigator who, much like the witnesses he documented, faithfully recorded only what could be observed. Years hence, when researchers delved into the remaining pages, they discovered a record free of conjecture, filled solely with observation. It stands as a quiet testament to a night when something immense and silent glided over the Atlantic, leaving behind no physical trace save the recollection of the profound stillness in the air as it passed. From the enigmatic heavens to the concealed archives, we will return tomorrow with more revelations. Support Night Archive by liking this video and subscribing for daily content.